Chapter 353. But Yu Ming shook his head. There's nothing to guess. I haven't had much contact with you. But now that I think about what you did in the city of Wei, even though I don't know the details of your plan, I can imagine that it must be a meticulous plan. People like you are too smart. It's normal that you don't trust others. But you should know that not everyone in this world is as smart as you. Maybe some fools just want to live a peaceful and happy life and don't want to think too much. Oh. Li Yunxin smiled. You want to say that you are that kind of fool. Yu Ming shook his head and looked to the side as if he felt helpless towards Li Yunxin. After a while he looked at him. You have seen some of the things that the art saint left in this world, right? She left some demons or something else. In Changji Town, you told me that you couldn't save Wuxia and Lily for the time being because you wanted to reach the level of the art saint, right? You really know more. Li Yunxin said. Yes. He had seen the evil king and the 7 sons at the Pitfall Mountain. Different from the things that he created when he reached the transcendent state and the true state, the demons that the art saint created actually had divine sense, as if they really existed in this world. But the things that he created, whether it was the green-armored general, the archer, or the walker, were just ordinary bodies. They had almost no divine sense. The combat power that they could exert in this world was only slightly above average. Therefore he really wanted to know what the art saint had done to achieve such a level. I planned to tell you after you recovered your demon power. But I will tell you now. Yu Ming adjusted his cloak. The reason is very simple. You have to let him really exist in this world. Once you have this foundation you can mold him according to your thoughts. After saying this he stopped talking and turned his head to look at the scenery at the foot of the mountain. It seemed that he was sulking because of Li Yunxin's words and speculations. Then Li Yunxin also stopped talking. He frowned and thought for a while, then sighed. So, it's such a simple reason. It was indeed a very simple principle. He already knew that there were Yin gods in this world. For example, many people in a certain place believed that there was a mountain god on a mountain. Then, if it was by chance and there were enough believers, then the mountain god might really be manifested. There were 3 types of Yin spirits and this was one of them. Yu Ming's words, in addition to his own understanding of painting, should be saying, for example, to first create such a mountain god. This thing took shape and became a part of this world. Then with this thing as the foundation he drew what he wanted. Naturally, there were many technical details that needed to be recognized, practiced, and researched. But as long as there was such a general direction, then everything would not be difficult. The reason why Li Yunxin was certain that this method was correct was because of Mrs. Sanhua. He drew Dragon Lady Shavana's body for her. The Dragon Lady, Shavana, had been painted and enshrined in the Dragon King Temple in the city of Wei. Many villagers worshipped her. The power of faith and prayers of those people were naturally not enough to create a Yin spirit out of thin air. But according to Yu Ming's words, it could be considered as having some foundation in this world. Therefore he made that body for Sanhua. Although it could not transform into a real dragon, it had the ability to use flames. This kind of supernatural ability was not something that could be achieved with pure physical strength. Li Yunxin had been thinking about this matter, but the reason was so simple. Yu Ming smiled. The reason for many things is very simple. I only said one sentence and you understood it. It shows that you are a rare smart person. Then you should also know that there is a simple reason for it. People are the same as this kind of thing. Not everyone is like what you think. Maybe. Li Yunxin sighed softly. Everyone wants to live a simple life. Before you brought me to the city of Wei, I also wanted to live a simple life. Even before that, when my parents were still alive, what I thought was just to cultivate in seclusion and understand the way of immortals. But now, people in Jianghu have no choice. He murmured this sentence, then turned around and looked at the foot of the mountain outside the pavilion. At the foot of the mountain was the bustling market of the city of Little Rock, with people coming and going. He had good eyesight. Even if he was a little melancholy and absent-minded, but the scene of the bustling secular people living in an ordinary autumn afternoon was still vivid in his mind. He repeated the sentence, people in Jianghu have no choice, in his heart again and chuckled. This sentence was only said before. But now I have experienced it. In fact, there is another saying, it's hard to explain. In the past I didn't know what it felt like to be hard to explain. But gradually I know. You told me not to think of people as so complicated. It's hard to explain. At this point he suddenly stopped talking. Because he saw a person, no, 3 people. The thinking pavilion, at the top of the Little Rock Mountain was facing the market in the city. It was a huge market. Apart from the business district at the top of the mountain, most of the inns, restaurants, libraries and all kinds of stalls and hawkers were gathered there. It was 3 streets long and wide, and its scale was 3 or 4 times the size of Changji town. Usually, it was almost crowded, and today there was still a lot of people coming and going. With so many people, it was not easy to notice anyone. But as he was talking and looking, he happened to see a commotion. At the center of the commotion were 3 girls. One was dressed in red, and the other was dressed in white. There was also a young maid with her hair tied into 2 buns. The girl in white was riding a shiny white donkey with one leg to one side. The reins of the donkey were held in the hands of the maid. When Li Yunxi noticed them, they stopped in front of a soup cake shop. They seemed to be attracted by the aroma and stopped to take a look. But this shop was actually nothing more than a trolley. It stopped on the side of the street and put down a table and a bench. Then it lit the charcoal fire in the iron cylinder, took out all kinds of spoons and opened the shop. 3 girls and a little donkey took up a lot of space. The girl on the donkey refused to get down, so the donkey blocked the whole cart. But the 3 girls didn't leave after buying. Instead, they began chattering away. The most talkative one was the maid with her hair tied into 2 buns. She stared at the dozen or so spoons on the chopping board of the cart, slowly sniffing them one by one. After sniffing, she asked the stall owner, "What is this?" Then she turned around and told her young miss. At first, the stall owner saw that the 3 girls were very beautiful, like fairies descending from heaven, so he was very attentive. Not only did he tell them the names of the spoons, but he also told them how they were made. From their clothes, he knew they were young misses from rich families. Maybe if he made them happy, he would give them a tael of silver. But when he said that, the maid became more interested. As if there was no one else around, she began to chat with her young miss about the local conditions and customs along the way, such as what tasted good in which city, and what interesting things they saw in a certain place. Her young miss also pursed her lips and smiled faintly, replying casually. In this way the 3 girls blocked the customers, but soup cakes weren't something rare. Since this place was blocked, there were naturally other places. So people slowly walked past them, occasionally taking a few greedy glances at their beauty, which was also a pleasure. The stall owner wasn't in a hurry. Because they spoke softly, they should really be well-educated young misses. In Little Rock Canyon, he had seen a lot of gifted scholars and beautiful women, so he knew that among these young misses and young masters, there were many who were kind and good-natured, and few who were arrogant and domineering. As the saying goes, a servant knows etiquette. With such young misses standing in front of him, they blocked a lot of business and they seemed to be in a good mood, so they probably gave him a lot of money. It wasn't the first time he encountered this kind of thing, so he actually felt a bit happier. Entertaining these 3 was better than being busy for more than half an hour. In this way the 2 girls chatted and laughed for nearly half an hour. The girl in red next to them didn't say anything, but her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around, as if she couldn't get enough of the novelty of this market. Girls loved to chat, so the stall owner gradually became a bit impatient. Because he had asked for more than 10 kinds of spoons, but he had never ordered a bowl of soup cakes to try. The stall owner was a middle-aged man with a family, so he thought he should ask. If he could order any of the dishes, then he could ask for some money. So while the 2 girls were smiling, he asked with a smile, "Miss, do you want to try some soup cakes?" But the young miss in white on the donkey only glanced at him, then turned around and talked to the maid about that dumb scholar in Luzhou City. The stall owner thought that the young miss didn't hear what he said clearly. So he waited for a while, until they giggled again, then he dared to raise his voice and said, "Miss, my soup cakes not only satisfy hunger but also quench thirst. It's a rare taste." But unexpectedly, the maid with 2 buns of hair, who looked obedient and smart, suddenly changed her expression. The smile on her face disappeared in an instant and she turned around to stare at him. "Noisy. If you make any more noise, I'll eat you." How could the stall owner expect the little girl to change her expression so quickly? He was stunned for a moment. But then he heard the young miss in white on the donkey smile slightly, raised her hand and pretended to hit her. "You're just a shell, why are you so scary? If you scare people, how can the taste be good?" Then she looked at the stall owner. "Since you're so anxious, I'll just eat a little." The maid stuck out her tongue and giggled. When the stall owner heard this, he was slightly relieved. He was most afraid that his master was as unreasonable as the maid, then he would have wasted half an hour. So he hurriedly smiled, it's okay, but halfway through his words he was dumbfounded. Because he saw the young miss in white reach into her left sleeve, he thought she was going to give him money. However, when she really took out the item, it was actually a bloody heart. The stall owner was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. He even forgot to think about how the bloody thing in the sleeve of the white dress didn't get wet. The next moment, the young miss raised her hand, and there was a cracking sound. Such a bloody, hot and steaming thing was thrown on the chopping board of the stall. Then she smiled warmly at the stall owner. Cut this and heat it up. Don't be too old and don't be too raw. Just fresh and tender. Then she raised her hand and pointed at the dozen spoons on the cart. Add this, and this and dip it in the sauce and soup. The stall owner was dumbfounded and speechless. The people near the stall also stopped and looked at the scene in astonishment, and then whispered to each other. Seeing his dumbfounded expression, the servant girl giggled again. It was as if she had seen something very funny. He also reached into his sleeves and searched for a while. Unexpectedly, he found a big shiny gold ingot. She casually threw the big ingot on the chopping board, and with a dong sound she said, "My young miss is hungry. Why are you still standing there?" This big ingot immediately pulled the stall owner back to his senses. His eyes became even rounder, and he grabbed the ingot, looked at it again and tried to put it into his mouth and bite it, but he had lived for dozens of years and had never seen what gold looked like. Even if he bit it, he couldn't tell whether it was real or fake. But seeing a group of people on the street stretching their necks to stare at the ingot in his hand in disbelief, he hurriedly put it into his pocket. Then, trembling with fear, he forced himself to pull himself together. Yes. I'll give it a try. He had been making soup pancakes for more than 10 years, and had never really taken care of meat. Usually he could only cut a few tails of meat on New Year's Day for a sumptuous meal. How would he know any exquisite cooking methods? But fortunately, the young miss in white only said, "Heat it up." So he first tried to wash the heart and liver and then carefully cut it with a knife. But perhaps because this thing was bloody and scary, he felt his heart palpitate as he cut it, and secretly looked at the three girls with his eyes. The more he looked, the more flustered he felt. When he boiled water under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he scalded the heart and liver pieces until they broke, and then put them in a big pot. Then he used a big rough porcelain bowl to mix the sauce and soup according to the young miss's instructions. But at this time, when he smelled the heart and liver pieces, he still felt a fishy smell. So for some reason he first used his finger to pick up a piece, dipped it in the sauce and put it into his mouth wanting to taste it. But he couldn't taste anything. He only felt that he had chewed something in his mouth, and felt satisfied after the food went down. But when he asked about the fishy smell, the taste faded out of his mouth as if he was chewing wax. He looked up and saw the young maid frowning as if she wanted to hurry him, but he was more worried that the gold ingot in his arms would be taken back. He hurriedly smiled. "I don't know why, it doesn't taste good." However, the young lady suddenly covered her mouth and giggled. Her eyes were sparkling as she said, "You idiot! How can there be any taste when you eat your own heart and liver?" Hearing her words, the stall owner was stunned. After a long time, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down again. Like a ball breaking, there was a pew sound. His clothes were neatly torn in the middle. Not only were his clothes torn apart, but his stomach and chest were also neatly split open. He opened his mouth and felt his whole body suddenly lose strength. He subconsciously reached into his stomach and chest. He wanted to check if his heart and liver were still there. But he only felt that his body was as empty as his consciousness. With a bang, he fell on his back, and a stone that looked like an ingot in his clothes rolled far away with blood. The dead silence only lasted for a breath's time. The next moment, all the people on the street let out terrifying screams, like a group of frightened chickens, ducks, pigs and dogs, running in all directions, trampling on each other and flipping the wicker baskets of the stalls on the street. They all ran for their lives with their hands over their heads. And this sound seemed to make the young miss in white feel that it was too noisy. She suddenly frowned and took a slight breath. And then, suddenly, there was a crane cry that was so sharp that it was like a sharp knife scratching the eardrums, and it went straight to the sky. But after this sound, all the other sounds stopped. The people on the 3 long streets, the people in the whole market, all bled from their 7 orifices, fell down and died in an instant. Then she lightly jumped off the little black donkey, walked 2 steps, kicked away the stall owner whose stomach had been cut open, and leaned on his little cart, using her slender white fingers to play with the scalded heart and liver. She ate it in a gentle manner. After a quarter of an hour, the sound of chaotic footsteps could be heard. 5 swordsmen holding long swords appeared at the end of the street. They first looked at the corpse-strewn street and then looked at each other. Gritting their teeth, they slowed down their steps and slowly approached. Then the first swordsman shouted sternly, "The 5-sword sect has stationed cultivators in Little Rock City. Where did you demons come from, and how dare you commit murder here?" But the woman in white and her servant girl did not pay attention to them, and only focused on enjoying the food. Instead, the woman in red, who had been silent all this time, opened her mouth. She frowned slightly and in a sweet voice she shouted back, "Five-sword sect? I'm looking for stinky Taoist priests like you who don't know life from death. Where is your sect leader? Get out here for me." The swordsman laughed coldly. Hee hee. And you're actually demons who have come to our door? You're the one who doesn't know life from death. Our sect leader just killed a big demon in the Qing kingdom a few days ago, and now you little demons have come to our door. Hearing this, the woman in red was slightly stunned and looked at the woman in white. Then, the woman in white stood up straight, suddenly raised her hand, and pointed 4 times at the 5 swordsmen. After these 4 points, except for the swordsman who had spoken, the heads of the 4 people behind him suddenly flew up into the sky. With a few splashes, a large amount of blood sprayed out, covering the swordsman's entire body. The swordsman was immediately stunned. When he came to his senses, he wanted to run away. Among the 5 people, his cultivation was the highest and he was already in the transcendent realm. But that demon was right in front of him, and with a raise of her hand she killed 4 people. She was a terrible big demon. But how could such a terrible big demon appear in Little Rock City, the gate of the 5-sword sect? In one breath, he ran 4 steps and then made a sword sign, and was about to fly away on the sword like to escape. But the 3 terrible demons behind him did not catch up. He could only hear the female monster in red shouting from afar. "Let your sect leader know. The princess of Dongting is here. Tell her to hand over my husband. If even a hair is missing, I'll kill your whole sect." Chapter 354. All of this is seen by Li Yunxin standing in the pavilion at the top of the mountain. So he is stunned. When Yu Meng stands up and walks to him, he lets out a sigh of relief and whispers to himself. What happened? Red Lady claims that there is a dragon soul hidden in her body. And Bai Yunxin comes to get the dragon soul under the order of King Golden Rock. After the battle in Dongting, this female monster said that she can't fully trust Li Yunxin and suddenly kidnapped Red Lady. Why are these 3 people here now? Yu Ming frowns and stares at the corpses at the foot of the mountain for a while. He turns to look at Li Yunxin, the princess of Dongting? You've seen her. In the school of the Emperor Star in Mount June. The daughter of Lord Dongting. Li Yunxin takes a deep breath. What the hell, who is it? He could clearly hear Red Lady's delicate shout. Li Lang was undoubtedly referring to himself. But it seems that someone told her that she was caught by Jin Guangzi and brought to the Wuxia sword sect. Who did it? Yu Meng also takes a deep breath. But he stares at the woman in white by Yunxin. Demons? He whispers, thousands of innocent lives. If it was in the past. Li Yunxin is silent for a while. She did it to draw out the people of the Wuxia sword sect. But, she is indeed a demon. She was too lazy to think about it, so she went directly to the gate town of the Wuxia sword sect and killed people on the street. Daotong also burned the whole city of Weiqing. Including your family. The pot calling the kettle black. Today it is not the Daotong and Kenzo in the past. It is a disgrace to these 2 words. Yu Meng swings his sleeves angrily. He is now a mortal, so he has the feelings and thoughts of mortals. Although he keeps saying that he doesn't want to get involved in the disputes of the world, he still cares about these things. Li Yunxin only glanced at him, then turned to look at the 3 demonesses at the foot of the mountain. The swordsman sent by the 5-mile sword sect to Little Rock Canyon had already flown away on his sword light. The 3 girls were still standing in the deathly silent market square. The master and the servant were still eating people's tender hearts and livers. As for Red Madam, she remained silent and only looked in the direction of 5-spark sword sect. A silvery bell-like laughter could be faintly heard from the top of the mountain. After watching for the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, Yu Meng suddenly sneered, "Don't you realize that this is a good thing? You told me to disguise myself as a Freemasonry elder so that you could sneak into the 5-sword sect to kill Jin Guangzi. But if these 3 demons cause a ruckus here, if Jin Guanyue really comes or if she doesn't and all her remaining disciples come out, you will have a great chance." Yu Meng sneered. Li Yunxin also sneered. Great opportunity? Borrowing the power of a woman was very boring. Moreover, these 3 stupid monsters messed up my plan for no reason. They can't accomplish anything but they're good at spoiling things. After saying that, he clenched his teeth. I'm going to drive them away. He was about to leap out of the wooden pavilion. However, Yu Meng grabbed his wrist and said, "Wait." Li Yunxin frowned and turned to look at him. "What?" "I think it's your heart that can't bear it." Yu Meng let go of his hand and put his arm into his cloak. The days of autumn were short. At this time the sun was gradually tilting to the west. There was a slight reddish-orange color in the sunlight, and the chill gradually crept up from under their feet. But you have to know that although you're a demon now, you used to be a human. They, on the other hand, were true demons. It's not like I haven't seen human and demon falling in love before. Yu Ming smiled. None of them had a good ending. The demons' feelings come and go violently. This year they make vows of undying love, more lingering than any secular couple. But next year they get angry and turn around to eat their husband and wife alive. To them, humans are nothing but playthings. Li Yunxin sneered. What are you trying to say? The female demon in red seems to have feelings for you. Yu Ming said in an unquestionable tone, but either you're being used now or this love won't last long. Why do you have to think so highly of yourself? Li Yunxin suddenly got angry. He raised his eyebrows like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He shouted, bullshit. You're the one who has feelings. You're a few thousand years old, yet you can do it to two lowless. You're shameless to the extreme. Yu Ming frowned. Lowless? What the hell? But then he shook his head and smiled. I do have feelings. How about it? I'm much happier than before. Don't you have feelings? I don't want to talk nonsense with you. Li Yunxin grunted, got up and was about to fly away. But just as he was about a foot in the air, Yu Ming grabbed his hand and pulled him back down. Yu Ming said that his injuries were serious. This was not an exaggeration. 10 days ago, Li Yunxin was first blasted by the heavenly thunder jointly launched by the three sects on Mount June. Then he had a fierce battle with Chen Kongzi. Before the injuries on his body had healed, he encountered the golden light beam. He was pierced by a group of sword cultivators who were good at fighting. Then he was blasted down from the sky by the golden light beam with the glazed sword heart. If it was a normal true realm demon, he would have gone to see Black by Yanjun if one of these things happened. But he relied on the strong body of the dragons and the art of painting to survive. Then he killed until the sky was dark. But even so, he was extremely weak at the moment. Yu Ming pulled him like he was pulling a kite in a strong wind. Li Yunxin didn't stand firm when he landed and almost fell to the ground. He was furious. He grabbed Yu Ming's hand and stared at him fiercely. You're courting death. But there was no panic on Yu Ming's face. Instead, his expression became serious. He didn't look at Li Yunxin. Instead, he slightly raised his head and leaned forward to look at the sky. If you really fly out, you're courting death. After saying this, he shook off Li Yunxin's hand. A profound realm has arrived. Because of this sentence, Li Yunxin was stunned. But after 3 breaths, he suddenly jumped up. How did you know? A Kenzo profound realm. Yu Ming slightly frowned and narrowed his eyes, as if he was comprehending something subtle and hard to grasp. He is cultivating the way of rushing sword. Oh, it's a method I created before. The way of rushing sword goes against yin and yang to rush to the sky. Look at the sky. After saying this, he clasped his hands behind his back and took a step back. He seemed to be thinking about something. Li Yunxin frowned and looked at the sky. He found that the clouds in the sky formed a huge circle. There were a few wisps of light clouds floating in the originally autumn sky. Right now, those clouds were being pushed away by some invisible and magical force with Little Rock as the center. They retreated to a very, very far away place. And only now did Li Yunxin notice that the whole world had become quiet. This meant that the sound of the wind had disappeared. Because the sound of the wind had disappeared, the trees also stopped shaking. The trees no longer shook and the whole city was silent. Li Yunxin gradually began to feel stuffy in his chest and a slight palpitation. It was as if there was a very important decision waiting for him in front of him that would affect his future. He realized that this feeling was called coercion. He had experienced it once at Shinryu's place, but he didn't know if it was because he was too injured or too weak. This Kenzo profound realm swordsman mentioned by Yu Ming hadn't even appeared, but he already gave him a more imposing coercion than Shinryu's. As a great demon of the true realm, he could feel this almost tangible pressure, let alone a city full of mortals. No one dared to make a sound. They had all become trembling ants. Yu Ming's voice came from behind him. It was very low, as if he was afraid of disturbing something. He probably came to put out the fire and happened to pass by here. Or he came to search for you and saw the demon aura in the city and rushed over. The way of the soaring sword should be the soaring heaven grotto of Kenzo. The soaring heaven grotto's mountain gate is in the Yi country. A few months ago, Wei Liaozi of the soaring heaven grotto went to chase after the ghost emperor, but his cultivation was destroyed. This person should be the new sect master of the soaring heaven grotto. He whispered these words, walked to Li Yunxin and looked at him. Golden photon lost, so a mysterious realm came out of the cloud mountain. This is reasonable. with this mysterious realm in charge, Golden Photon will also come. Now that things have come to this, I won't persuade you anymore. I just want to tell you, with your current injuries, it will be difficult for you to deal with the peak of the transcendent realm. If you rush out, not only will you not be able to save the 3 demons, but you will also die. If you are alive, maybe they plan to use the demons to lure you and they can still save their lives. Besides, that demon dares to cause trouble at the mountain gate of the 5-city sword sect at this time. She must have something to rely on. Li Yunxin sat down. But his body was exposed as if he was very unconvinced and wanted to show off to someone. He sat on the wooden railing of the pavilion, with one leg hanging down as if he wanted to watch a show. I don't need you to talk nonsense, he said indifferently. I am just afraid that they will ruin my plan. With the current situation, only a fool would run out. After saying this, he was silent for a while and then said, Bah. It's not like I haven't seen a mysterious realm before. Then he looked up at the sky as if trying to find where the swordsman was hiding. Seeing his behavior, Yu Ming shrank back into the pavilion, back into the shadow, leaving only his feet in the sunlight. How many mysterious realms have you seen? You have seen the mysterious realms of the demons. But you are dragons and you are born with the power of dragons. If you see the ordinary mysterious realms of the demons such as Lord Dongting, or the Evil King, you won't feel too much pressure. If you see the mysterious realms of the dragons, you will feel a sense of intimacy. You have also seen Kun Wu Zi of the Langya Paradise. Yu Ming paused for a while. Kun Wu Zi was to you at that time like you were to the swordsman who just escaped with the sword light. Do you think he is a threat to you? But his attitude towards you is quite polite. Can you guess why? Li Yunxin snorted. If you have something to say, just say it. Yu Ming was silent for a while and then said in a low voice, I don't know what is happening on the Cloud Mountain now. But at that time, the 36 paradises and the 72 sects all had the difference between inside and outside. Actually, it is the difference between hiding from the world and entering the world. This 5-dragon sword sect, the sect that chased after you, and the Langya Paradise, are all considered to have entered the world. To you, they may still be experts living in seclusion, but within the Daotong Kenzo, they are already entangled with worldly affairs. They often deal with worldly affairs, so they are more or less infected with worldly affairs. The reason you can use worldly schemes to deal with Yunzi and Kun Wuzi is because they have entered the world and know about worldly affairs. But they also disdain to study worldly affairs. So you can play them in the palm of your hand. But this soaring heaven paradise, Yu Ming said in a low voice, is not a worldly affair. I think you have probably never seen what a real cultivator looks like. This time you will probably see one. At this point, Li Yunxin's emotions seemed to have finally calmed down. He began to listen to Yu Ming's words carefully. Then he slightly frowned. You mean, like a child? Yu Ming thought for a while. You can say that. Cultivators who do not enter the world when they cultivate to the profound realm are no different from a child. So that's why there is such a big show. Li Yunxin turned his head to look at the horizon again. When Ling Kongzi entered the city of Wei, no one knew about it. When Yunzi entered the city of Wei, no one knew about it either. Kun Wuzi, on the other hand, met Li Yunxin in the rain. But this person released his powerful aura without any scruples. Or he intentionally showed off. But a profound realm cultivator does not need to show off to a true realm demon. Otherwise it would be naturally so. Cultivators who cultivated to the profound realm would have such an aura, but he was too lazy to deliberately hide it. So you should also know what this means. Yu Ming said in a low voice, don't think about using your schemes to challenge him. In your eyes, Kun Wuzi may be more intelligent than this kind of cultivator. But in fact, this kind is the most dangerous. Li Yunxin said, because we do not know what he will actually do. Yu Ming smiled ambiguously, it's good that you know. Li Yunxin was silent for a while, then turned his eyes to look at the 3 female demons in the market at the foot of the mountain. They were no longer talking and laughing. Li Yunxin saw that Bai Yunxin's white robe seemed to be a little bigger, like a cat's fur standing up. No, it should be said that a bird felt the impending danger and its feathers were standing up. Her white robe fluttered slightly as if she was standing in the wind. The terrible aura made the donkey beside her kneel on the ground, unable to make a sound. Hong Yangzi raised her head and looked at the sky. But she naturally could not see anything, so she slowly walked around but still found nothing. So she took a deep breath and spoke. At first, her voice was hoarse as if there was a terrible force pressing on her throat. Who is hiding? When she said this, her voice became a little softer and also a little louder. You stinky Taoists, don't you even dare to show your true face? As soon as she finished speaking, she stopped. After waiting for about the time it takes for half an incense to burn, a female voice comes from the sky, stabbing over like a sword. A little demon girl in Dongting, a little demon girl who can't go home, how dare you come to the gate of our Wujing Sword School and make trouble? Then the owner of the voice, the head of Wujing Sword School, Jin Guangzi, came from the sky on a 5-color auspicious cloud. She stood on the cloud and her complexion seemed to have recovered a lot. But no one knew if she just looked okay like Li Yunxin. She glanced down coldly and suddenly laughed. What kind of status does the sect master of Soaring Heaven Cave have? How could she show up in front of you? As for you coming here, it's a coincidence. She looked at Hong Yangzi and Bai Yunxin. I was thinking about how to make Li Yunxin walk into the trap. Chapter 355. Hearing her words, Red Lady and Bai Yunxin look at each other again. Then she turns around and says loudly, You kidnapped my Li Lang, but now you don't dare to admit it. Hearing this, Jin Guangwen laughs again. Zongyun descends a little bit so that she can see the faces of the 3 female monsters more clearly. You're Li Lang? Our Xinmin Orthodox sect caught a demon. Even if we beat and killed him, why don't we dare to admit it? Little female monster, where did you hear the rumor that Li Yunxin is with me? Red Lady is stunned for a moment and then turns around to look at Bai Yunxin. The daughter of King Rock has been silent and only let the princess of Dongting negotiate. At this moment she finally frowns and raises her head to look at Jin Guangwen. Is it true? Then what about Li Yunxin? He was seriously injured by me and fled in panic. Jin Guangwen sneers, but it's fine now. After capturing you two, he will definitely come to save us. I'm not afraid that he will escape to the end of the world. But Bai Yunxin turns a deaf ear to her words. She lowers her head and thinks for a while. Then she looks at Red Lady. This Taoist priest should be telling the truth. She doesn't have Li Yunxin. Then she doesn't need to save him. Let's go. After saying this, she turns around and leaves. The little maid next to her glares at Jin Guangwen. Then she pulls up the black donkey who is kneeling on the ground and shivering and follows them. Red Lady doesn't want to give up and wants to argue. She didn't know what kind of magic Bai Yunxin cast on her body. Although she twisted her body, she had no choice but to follow Bai Yunxin like the little donkey. Bai Yunxin's actions this time showed that she didn't take Jin Guangyan and the profound realm sword cultivator seriously at all. She really came and went as she pleased. How can Jin Guangwen listen to her? She immediately shouts, Evil demons came to my little rock town and killed people. Do you think you can get away? But after she shouted, the 3 demonesses did not pay any attention to her. They continued to walk along the street toward the city gate. Jin Guoguang angrily rode the cloud and leaped forward. He raised his hand and sent out a sword ray that covered the sky towards their heads. The sword light whizzed over and instantly pounced on the heads of the 3 demons. However, Bai Yunxin raised her hand slightly, and a row of feather-like afterimages met the sword light and dispersed it instantly. However, her afterimage did not dissipate and went straight for the cloud of golden light. Jin Guangzi quickly dodged to the side. Unexpectedly, the afterimage drew an arc and scattered half of the cloud under her feet. Jin Guangzi's body swayed and she almost fell off the cloud. Only then did Bai Yunxin stop and turn around to look at her. You Taoist, you're so untactful. Since you fought with Li Yunxin and you're only at the true state, how could I not know that you're heavily injured? Now that I'm not going to kill you, you actually dare to stop me? Jin Guangzi steadied herself and angrily said, You, what an arrogant demon. However, what Bai Yunxin said was the truth. After she obtained the magic weapon Lustrous Glass Sword Heart, she used her own life to refine it. Because of this, after several decades of hard work, even though she was only at the true state, she could use the treasure made by the sage. But because of this, once the magic weapon was damaged, she would also suffer a terrible injury. Her sword light just now could only be considered a bluff. But her power was real. It was the Chongshao Grotto Heaven Profound Realm Cultivator who came to Little Rock Canyon. But, even now that cultivator still did not show up and did not make a move. This made Jin Guangzi anxious. What was that expert thinking? Was he really going to let these 3 demonesses go? At this moment she was in a dilemma, so she could only sneer. I know you're the daughter of the Golden Rock King. But now the situation in the world is not the same as before. With a Kenzo expert overseeing Little Rock Canyon, do you think you can easily escape? Otherwise, these hundreds of lives? Bai Yunxin suddenly chuckled and interrupted her. You stupid Taoist. A Kenzo expert? You asked that expert of yours? does he dare to show up now? And ask him, does he dare to make a move now? Jin Guangzi was stunned. What? Bai Yunxin no longer paid attention to her, turned around and continued to walk towards the city gate. Jin Guangzi hesitated for 2 breaths' time. She wondered if this was a trick of the demoness to stall for time, a bluff. She also thought that if it was true, then what was wrong with that expert? A profound realm sword cultivator. Why didn't he dare to make a move? Fortunately, this question didn't take her too long to ponder. She suddenly heard a man's voice. This market square was in the northeast of Little Rock Canyon, close to the Dai Gate in the north. Bai Yunxin was walking towards the city gate. In fact, she was only a dozen steps away from going out. The voice came from outside the city gate. Golden Rock Princess said that if that guy dares to make a move, I will kill both you and him. Then a tall and sturdy man wearing a golden robe and a golden silk crown slowly walked in from the city gate. He had a pair of deep blue eyes, like 2 bottomless pools of water. Jin Guangzi frowned. She didn't know when this man had appeared outside the city gate. This meant that this man either had an extraordinary escape technique, or his cultivation level was far higher than hers. This thought came into her mind, and then she thought of the way he called himself, I. Jin Guangzi's expression became serious, and she slowly stepped back on the magic cloud under her feet. At the same time she stared at the man. Could it be that you are a neighbor of my 5 dragon sword sect in the Yi country? The man smiled. His voice was deep and powerful, but everyone could hear it clearly. Does a small sword sect deserve to be my neighbor? If you want to talk about neighbors, I think the Soaring Heaven Cave might be qualified. It's just that Wei Liaozi, that old bastard, has already been crippled, and now he's supporting a little kid to become the sect leader. Speaking to this point, his voice suddenly became louder and he shouted, Little kid, you've come to my fief as a guest, and you still haven't shown yourself. Because of this shout, the ring of clouds that had been forced out by the profound realm Kenzo cultivator in the sky dispersed in an instant. Immediately after, the countless strands of clouds were like swimming snakes. They quickly converged into a long snake in the sky, and from a long snake, it transformed into a sharp sword that pointed straight towards the northwest of Little Rock Canyon. At this moment, Jin Guangzi didn't dare to stand on the top of the cloud. She scattered the magic cloud, landed on the ground and looked left and right. She really hoped that the expert of the Soaring Heaven Cave nearby would do as this Lord Tongtian said, and quickly show himself. Because that was the Lord Tongtian. Although the majority of the Yi country's territory was the dojo of the Wujin sword sect. However, just like the dojo divided by the Daotong and Kenzo couldn't control the demons, the great demons also had their own territory. The dojo of the various heavenly caves and sects of the Xianmen sect overlapped with the fief of the great demons in this world. Both of them were located in the territories of the various dynasties in the secular world. If someone were to really delineate all these forces on a map, they would probably only get a map filled with densely packed lines and names. This meant that from the point of view of the Daotong and Kenzo, in the dojo of the Wujin sword sect in the Yi country, there was a great demon like the Lord Tongtian. But from the demon's point of view, in the fief of the Lord Tongtian in the Yi country, there was a group of cultivators living in the dojo of the Yi country. And both of them thought that they had ownership of the mortal towns in their respective jurisdictions. The Daotong and Kenzo were shepherds, while the demons regarded it as their own hunting ground. The Dragon Dynasty, the Daotong and Kenzo, and the secular dynasties, overlapped on the same piece of land. And now, the great demon Lord Tongtian, who occupied more than a quarter of the Yi country's territory in the Tongtian swamp, suddenly came to Little Rock Town. Jin Guangzi knew that he had another name, hatred. At this moment, she, who was already weak, didn't want to have a conflict with hatred at this critical moment. Therefore, she was more eager than the Lord Tongtian for the expert of the Soaring Heaven Cave to show up, so that the great demon's attention would be diverted to him. After Yazi shouted like that, he stopped his footsteps. He blocked the path in front of Bai Yunxin with his hands behind his back. He looked at her for a while with a faint smile and said, Princess Jin Peng, why are you in such a hurry to leave? You're going to marry into the dragons and you're an old acquaintance of my 9th brother. Now that you know that my 9th brother has been captured by the Kenzo, it's not good for you to stay out of this matter. Bai Yunxin looked at him coldly. You told this stupid fish that Li Yunxin was captured. But he didn't. Coming here has already wasted my time. If my father wants to blame me, I'm afraid even 10 Lord Tongtians can't afford it. Jin Guangzi heard the conversation between them very clearly. Although the headmaster of the Wuji sword sect didn't know the inside story between the Peng King's daughter and the son of the Shinryu, He knew that it was best not to get himself into trouble for the time being. Therefore he immediately said from afar, "Princess Jin Peng is telling the truth, Li Yunxin is not in our Wuji sword sect." Hatred slightly tilted his head, and his gaze passed over by Yunxin's body, and stared at Jin Guangzi. "If I say he's in your hands, then he's in your hands." With just this one glance, Jin Guangzi suddenly felt a violent and terrifying murderous aura rushing towards her. She was only in a trance for a while, and then she immediately felt a splitting headache and her vision turned black. It was as if she was hit by a raging bull, and her soul was about to be thrown out of her body. She screamed, and used all her remaining strength to take out her magic treasures to defend herself. As for himself, he retreated hundreds of feet in a row. Then he heard those magical treasures exploding into balls of mystic light in the air, and all this was just because the Lord Tongtian stared at her. This demon. When did he become so terrifying? But there was a hand on her back. She immediately stopped flying backward, and her whole body was wrapped by the gentle Howren sword chi. It was as if she had come from the raging sea to the gurgling stream. The injuries in her body were cleansed by the sword chi, and she immediately felt that her strength had recovered by 70% to 80%, and the stagnant chi in her chest had also been cleared out. Jin Guangzi hurriedly turned her head to look behind her. She saw an old man in white with white hair and beard move his hand away from her back, and slowly walk past her. She had never seen the new headmaster of the Chongshao cave, and the brief contact she had had before was through voice transmission. Now that she saw the old man, she realized that this should be the mysterious realm sword cultivator from the cave. The old man was dressed in white and his feet were bare. He held a thin and green bamboo in his hand, and there was a thin branch sticking out of the bamboo joint, with a narrow bamboo leaf hanging on it. When he walked, his clothes fluttered, but there was no wind under his feet, and not even the dust on the ground was stirred up. Jin Guangzi thought for a moment, took a deep breath and said, "The Venerable Lord is here in person. Thank you, Venerable Lord." But the mysterious realm swordsman didn't say anything, and continued to walk forward. When he was more than 10 steps away from the Lord Tongtian, he stopped. Then he quietly looked at the 4 monsters in front of him, without moving or speaking. At this time the Lord Tongtian also saw the newcomer. But he just glanced at them and then continued to say to Bai Yunxin, "King Peng blames me? You must be joking. If King Peng knew that I was walking around the world with the 2 princesses, I'm afraid that he would be eager for me to go to him. How could he blame me?" The conversation between the 2 people was like a riddle. However, Red Lady finally took advantage of Yazi's pause to speak. "If I say I will do it." She looked at Bai Yunxin and then looked at Hatred, and her eyes were filled with the spirit of risking her life. "Find Li Yunxin and I will give you the dragon soul in my body. Whoever saves him, I will go with him. I know that you 2 have high cultivation. But my dragon soul was sealed in my body by my father with a secret method of the Shinryu. I can scatter the dragon soul with me with just a thought. If you 2, don't worry, little girl." Hatred laughed. He took a few steps forward, stretched out his hand like a loyal big brother, and gently rubbed Red Lady's head. "9th brother is my 9th brother. As a big brother, how can I not save him?" Then he paused, stared at Red Lady with a smile for a while, and then said, "But your father has been killed by the Shinryu. Don't you know?" Red Lady slightly opened her mouth and her eyes widened. After a while, "What?" "The Shinryu wants to declare war on the Xuanzong. But it is said that your father tried to remonstrate. When he failed, he tried to remonstrate to death. The Shinryu pitied his sincerity, and simply fulfilled his wish." Hatred smiled and sighed. "It is said that when he died, his real body was revealed. The blood that flowed out from his real body dyed half of the Ruoshui red. The corpse was eaten by millions of demons in the Ruoshui for 7 days and 7 nights. What a big fish." Red Lady was still in a daze. She seemed to only know how to say one word. Then said, "What?" Hatred sighed. "So, your father, who gave birth to your 9th brother with the Shinryu, has been killed? Who would dare to doubt the determination of the Shinryu to declare war on the Xuanzong? Therefore, my 9th brother was not captured by the Kenzo, but was also captured by the Kenzo. As for the Golden Rock Princess, quickly persuade this little girl to give me the dragon soul, and then I will speak to the Shinryu on your behalf, and ask her to reject the marriage with your adoptive father. Isn't that the best of both worlds?" Chapter 356. Lord Dongting. Li Yunxin frowns and breathes a sigh of relief. He then shrinks back into the pavilion. Is he really dead? When Lord Dongting went down the mountain, Lu Laodao once said that he heard the news. but at that time he thought it was a rumor. He used his holy power slightly and heard hatred vaguely saying those words. But he doesn't dare to probe more carefully, because he may be noticed. Yu Ming sees the change of his look. What are they talking about? Li Yunxin takes another step back. Lord Dongting was killed by Shinryu. Shinryu is going to fight against Daotong and Kenzo. After that, he frowns and paces back and forth in the pavilion. He whispers to himself, "It doesn't make sense." Yu Ming leans out slightly to look at the scene at the foot of the mountain. She turns to look at him. Demons and Xianmen will fight sooner or later. Why doesn't it make sense? Li Yunxin looks at him as if he is considering whether to tell him what is on his mind. Finally he says, "Do you know why I don't run down now but hide? Because my second brother is at the foot of the mountain." After saying these words, he meditates for a while as if he is sorting out extremely complicated clues. After the time it takes for half an incense to burn, he says again, "Before Lord Dongting went out of Dongting, he told me that hatred took the dragon god's order to get the dragon soul, which means something happened to Shinryu. He and Shinryu had an agreement. He wants to break the prohibition and get out of Dongting so he doesn't need anyone else to save him. He suspects that someone asked hatred to get the dragon soul in the name of Shinryu." Then he keeps silent for a while and walks back and forth in the pavilion. "Soon I saw Shinryu again. But I can be sure that Shinryu doesn't want to do this, at least not so soon, to fight against Xianmen." Li Yunxin frowns. She is worried about Dragon Sun. Compared with the power of Daotong and Kenzo, she is more worried about Dragon Sun. At the beginning she divided her power so that Dragon Sun could guard the world. But now Dragon Sun is getting stronger. Shinryu is worried that Dragon Sun will attack her. That's why she wants to resolve the conflict between her and the Dragon Sun first. She chose to settle the internal conflict. She can even win me over. I can't think why she is so anxious. Yu Ming says, isn't that the reason? When she is still a deterrent, she asks Dragon Sun to fight against Daotong and Kenzo. Once Dragon Sun dies, she will have no pressure. Even if Dragon Sun wins, they will lose a lot of strength. And she is still the common master of all monsters in the world. But will you kill Lord Dongting at this time? Li Yunxin turns to look at him. Lord Dongting has been guarding the dragon soul for Shinryu and stayed in Dongting for 2,000 years. This kind of loyalty is rare in the secular world, not to mention monsters. If Shinryu wants to restrain Dragon Sun, she should gather the power of other monsters. But now Lord Dongting is killed. Who dares to work for her? Yu Ming thinks for a while. Well, it's a bad move. It's not a bad move. There must be an inside story. Li Yunxin says, Shinryu is not like a fool. Lord Dongting is not stupid either, and he told me that things have changed. So, he takes a few steps forward and looks down the mountain. My second brother is not stupid either. He knows Shinryu's mind, and now he has become the vanguard. It is also a good choice to strengthen his strength in the war. It just depends on who is more scheming and clever. Yu Ming nods. So I can't show up. Li Yunxin frowns. He didn't kill me before because Shinryu is still there. Now I don't know what happened to Shinryu, but I have to prepare for the worst. If Shinryu is gone, he will swallow me if I show up now. Each of the 9 dragon sons wants to combine the 9 portions of dragon chi into one. They even want to get the true dragon's portion and the Dongding's portion. Li Yunxin sighs. I am the most delicious piece of meat now. He must come for me. After saying this, he is lost in thought. But suddenly he hears Yu Ming chuckling. At this time, the sun is getting closer to the west, and the sunlight finally disappears from the pavilion. Yu Ming holds his cloak and shakes his head in the autumn wind. I don't think so. He sits down again and looks at Li Yunxin. Your second brother is more likely to come for Unishan. Li Yunxin, you haven't seen Unishan yet, have you? I heard that it is a floating mountain. Li Yunxin thinks for a while. It is indeed easy to defend and difficult to attack. So has anyone told you that Unishan is actually walking around the celestial sphere? Li Yunxin is stunned. What? Yu Ming seems to be satisfied with his surprise. He smiled faintly. The cloud mountain isn't just standing there and not moving. It is walking around the celestial sphere. After saying this, he continues to look at Li Yunxin's expression. However, what made him slightly surprised was that Li Yunxin only froze for a short moment. After that, his expression returned to normal. It was as if a moving mountain peak in the sky was indeed the only thing that could shock him. And then, Li Yunxin says, Yu Ming smiles, your kung fu of guarding your heart is really amazing. And then, it is something that only the sages of the past know. There are not only cultivators but also mortals on Unishan. There are many mortals and they need food to survive. Cultivators also need to consume some materials. Although it is insignificant compared with mortals, the number is not small after a long time. So, every once in a while Unishan has to descend from the sky to replenish these materials. Yu Ming slows down his speech and looks down the mountain. They don't talk for a long time, so the demons at the foot of the mountain haven't acted yet. Hatred seems to be arguing with Bai Yunshin about something. But seeing that Li Yunshin's expression doesn't change, he knows it should not be something important. But he still looks out of the city. Little Rock is very big. At this time the sun is not as bright as at noon. A large area of land outside the city is shrouded in the shadow of the tall city wall. Some low woods and houses also lie low on the yellowish-brown field, looking like dormant demons and monsters. He takes back his gaze and lets out a sigh, but in fact it is not like this. It is just an excuse to replenish something. You should have seen what Kun Wuzi can do. It is said that he once overturned the entire Dongting. When a Xian realm cultivator makes a move he changes some rules. So, if there is really a need to replenish something, Unishan doesn't have to descend. Therefore, the real reason for Unishan to descend is... He pauses and looks at Li Yunshin. Do you want to know? Li Yunshin thinks for a while. I promise you. I will save Wu Su and Lily. And I will save them as soon as possible. Yu Ming slightly tilts his head. What else? Li Yunshin snorts softly. As long as you don't ruin my business for the time being, no matter who you are or who you are being used by, I will not care about your business for the time being. Yu Ming nods silently. Then he says, because I need to rest. Unishan is driven by the huge magic circle hidden in the mountain. It is said that the magic circle was given by the Devas tens of thousands of years ago. Disciples, leaders and heads of all the caves and schools in the world stay in Unishan all year round for this matter. The Reiki cultivated by cultivators can drive this magic circle. But it doesn't look like hard labor in the secular world. These cultivators meditate and occasionally spar. The Reiki they emit is enough. But this magic circle needs to be maintained. Yu Ming thinks for a while. The foundation of the magic circle is the power of the 5 elements. Because it stays in the sky all year round, the Reiki of earth and wood are used up the fastest. Every 500 years, it needs to descend. It doesn't need to replenish the daily consumption of food and drink but these things. But Unishan is like the last fortress to Xianmen. If the worst happens, the demons become enemies with Xianmen, then at the most critical moment they can rely on Unishan. Therefore this point can only be known by the sages of the past. This is to prevent it from being leaked. Possible enemies know that Unishan is the only weak point. Oh. Li Yunshin frowns and thinks for a while. Replenish the Reiki of earth and wood. So when you replenish these things the magic circle needs to stop working. Yu Ming nods, yes. Tell me more. Yu Ming smiles, there is nothing to tell me in detail. The core magic circle in Unishan is enchanted by the celestials. Even the sages can't pry into it. It is a secret of the celestials, more profound than the 3 schools of Daotong, Kenzo and painting. They won't allow us to practice it. Every 100 years, when Unishan falls, the soil and stones have to be transported from Yu country, and the trees can be harvested from anywhere. This process will last for about 10 days. 10 days. Li Yunshin thinks for a while. 10 days or 10 years? 10 days. Li Yunshin paces a few steps and looks down the mountain. Bai Yunshin was quarreling with Yazi, and the content was none other than the ownership of Red Lady. This was very strange. It was more like a quarrel between 2 mortals. She had slaughtered hundreds of people because she was impatient. They seemed to be stalling for time, waiting for something. He thinks for a while and turns to look at Yu Ming. Why does the soil and stones come from Yu country? I know there is a Hongling near Rong City in Yu country. Half of the men in the city are digging there. Is it because of Unishan? The earth chi in Yu country is strong. Yu Ming answers him. Hongling? That should be the case. Yu country is a crescent, surrounding Pitfall Mountain. The earth chi in the whole Yu country is very strong, so it is best to use the soil and stones from Yu country. Earth chi. Li Yunshin frowns. 5 elements chi. I practice painting. But there is no such thing as 5 elements chi in painting. But the swindlers in Jianghu like to use the 5 elements to fool people. As for earth and stones to supplement the earth chi, you used to be a sage. You should know that the earth in the 5 elements is not the soil on the ground. Is there such a saying in the Daotong and Kenzo? Yu Ming smiles, of course not. It also doesn't make sense. But you have to know that this is a magic circle set by the celestials. it is fine to fool people with a few words. If you really explain it in depth, won't you also reveal the crux of the problem? Don't worry about this for now. I want to say something else. He becomes serious. I just thought about it and calculated. So I know this year is probably the time when Unishan will fall. Let me calculate where the Cloud Mountain will land. Guess where it will land? Yi country? Yes. Yu Ming says seriously, Unishan is an inverted triangle. If it wants to fall, it needs a huge space to accommodate its lower half. In this 500 years, it is walking in the territory of Yi country. And in this Yi country, which place can accommodate Unishan? Guess again? Li Yunxin looks down the mountain and takes a deep breath. I am not familiar with Yi country. But since it is a landlocked country. Tongtian Swamp? Tongtian Swamp. Yu Ming nods slightly. Since it is called swamp, there are not many deep places. However, in the depths of Tongtian Swamp, there is Tongtian Lake. It is the residence of your second brother. If it wants to fall, it will fall there. Now that you know this, think about what is happening now. Can you think of anything? Li Yunxin is silent. He walks a few steps in the pavilion, suddenly claps his hands and sighs in a low voice. If you put it this way, it probably makes sense. An opportunity that happens once in 500 years, it can explain why Shinryu wants to go to war. And it has to fall in Tongtian Swamp, it can explain why hatred is so active. Since it is something that happens once in 500 years, it is not strange that Shinryu knows about it. If you can calculate it, the demons should also be able to calculate it. Yu Ming smiles but does not say anything. But Li Yunxin looks at him again. But you told me something that only the two sages know. Now I know that Yunshan won't be able to ascend to the sky for the next 10 days. You have kept the secret for 1,000 years and now you say it? Yu Ming snorts and laughs. Is Unishan now still the Unishan of Daotong and Kenzo? I think it is already the Unishan of the Freemasonry. It is not a pity to destroy such a Unishan. Moreover, I am not a saint anymore, I am just Yu Ming. I have already told you, I only want to be a secular person now. No matter what kind of earth-shattering event will happen in this world, the time before is enough for me to reincarnate as a secular person several times. What do I have to worry about? Li Yunxin is silent for a while, then sighs, I actually believe you a little. Yu Ming calmly shakes his head. In the next few days there will be more profound realm Taoists and swordsmen coming to the Yi Kingdom, near Little Rock Canyon and Tongtian Swamp. They can catch you and also drive away the big demons in the Yi Kingdom in advance. But I think for Unishan to come to this world, catching you has become a secondary matter. I guess there will be more big demons gathering in the Yi Kingdom. If they can kill some profound realm and true realm cultivators before Unishan comes to this world, they will have an advantage. There will also be people who want to take the soil and stones from the Yi Kingdom. Yu Ming smiles, then let out a sigh of relief. This time there will be a good show. Chapter 357. Yes. Li Yunxin replied in a low voice, how did you deal with this kind of thing before? Before? Yu Ming thought for a while, there's no such thing as before. Shinryu appeared 2,000 years ago, and the demons had a common ruler. Before that, at least before that time, I didn't really need to worry about the demons. As for me at that time, He was silent for a while and thought for a while. She was on good terms with the demons. At that time, the demons weren't as guarded as they are now. The demons wouldn't touch Yunshan's things. As for now, I guess there will be people from Daotong and Kenzo escorting them. But the worldly dynasties are still part of Daotong and Kenzo. It won't be easy for the demons to attack them if they use all the power of the country to escort these things. All right. Li Yunxin sighed. He looked down the mountain again. Then he frowned. Damn it. He thought that hatred would have a fierce battle with that arrogant Mystic Realm swordsman. But now that he looked down, he saw that the Mystic Realm swordsman retreated with the golden light. What kind of situation is this? It's reasonable. Yu Ming also looked down, Long Sun and a true state demon and 2. Transcendent state. Mystic Realm swordsman couldn't gain any advantage, so he left. First, both sides are preparing for the final battle. Second, he doesn't have any feelings of shame. Sai, your mind tricks won't work on them. After saying this, he looked at Li Yunxin again, and found that he was staring at the 4 demons at the city gate, frowning, as if he was thinking about something complicated. Yu Ming didn't disturb him. He looked down the mountain again. Then he found that the 4 demons also said something and walked out of the city gate. But Li Yunxin's eyes didn't follow them. He seemed to be lost in thought. All right. Think slowly. Yu Ming shook his head lightly, turned around and walked out of the wooden pavilion. Therefore Li Yunxian pondered for nearly an hour at this place. Originally, when the demons killed people in the city, people already didn't dare to go out. Then, under the powerful pressure of a profound realm swordsman, no one dared to make a sound. By now, the cultivators of the orthodox Shenmen sect had left, and the demons had also left, leaving only corpses strewn across the 3 streets as well as people who were in a constant state of panic. So many people had died for no reason, there had to be an explanation. It was only after this hour that the nobles of Little Rock Canyon dared to grab their swords, spears, and cudgels and look into the market square. Instead, he saw the corpses of 4 swordsmen who had been stationed in the city by the 5 draconic sword. These corpses, when they were alive, were all like true immortals in the hearts of the common people. But now they were all lying on the ground and they didn't even collect their corpses. The arrestor leading the team was smart. He quickly ordered his men to seal off the road and collect the corpses of the 4 swordsmen. If this kind of scene was seen by the common people, perhaps the people in the city would be thrown into confusion. Next, they began to deal with the hundreds of corpses. From top to bottom, who in Little Rock Canyon had any experience dealing with this kind of thing? This was almost equivalent to a military disaster. But a military disaster was still manageable. After the troops and horses had passed, there were still days of peace and security. However, the current situation was that the demons had killed people in the city, and the immortals of the Shenmen sect had rushed over after hearing the news, but they were killed by the demons. People didn't know the specific process, but they could imagine it from the results. Thus, by nightfall, rumors had already spread throughout the city. They said, a terrifying female demon had appeared outside the city, and had come to the city to absorb people's yang energy. This demon was also abnormally powerful, so after killing 4 immortals in the city, it swaggered off. Thinking about it again, why did the 5 draconic sword sect want to worship in the mortal world, and why did they open their mountain gate to accept disciples? It must be because they were no match for the demon in the previous fierce battle, so now they wanted to find more people to teach immortal techniques and slay demons. Although this rumor was made up by the people in the marketplace, it wasn't far from the truth. Thus, the number of people who planned to try their luck at the mountain gate of the 5 draconic sword sect suddenly decreased. Who would dare to fight a demon that even immortals who had cultivated for many years couldn't subdue? When it was time to light the lamps, many people ran out of the city. They planned to leave Little Rock Canyon and seek refuge elsewhere. But how could the prefectural magistrate allow this to happen? Those who ran out of his jurisdiction were refugees. Now, no matter what the reason was, refugees had appeared in his Little Rock Canyon, so he couldn't protect his official position. Thus, he strictly ordered the soldiers in the city to seal the 4 gates, and not let a single person leave the city. After explaining the rules to the 2 prefectural magistrates in the city, he used the excuse of going to the prefecture to report the disaster situation, to lead his people down from the top of the city wall and escaped without a trace. After another 2 hours, it was the hour of the Sioux. Usually at this time, the streets of the city would still be brightly lit with people coming and going. But now the streets were deserted. Those who couldn't leave the city hid in their homes, and those who wanted to leave the city were still entangled at the 4 gates. The bright moon of early autumn rose, and its moonlight sprinkled on the bluestone streets, making it exceptionally deserted. In the pavilion, Li Yunxian slightly relaxed his brows and let out a soft sigh. Just like that, he thought for an hour and a half. For him, this was a very intense mental labor. And what he was thinking about was the current situation of the world, as well as his own situation. The situation of the world was very chaotic. The demons, the celestial sect, the Freemasons, and the disciples left behind by the Art Saint. Their forces were tangled together, and there was me and you, and there was you and me. Pulling one hair could affect the whole body. Many of his plans had deviated because of this complicated situation. The more complicated the background, the more variables there were. In the past, he really wanted to muddy the water and fish in troubled waters. But now that he knew more, he realized that he was in a small pond and felt that the water wasn't muddy enough. Now that he jumped out of the pond and into the big river, he realized that the Jianghu was actually a terrible turbid current. How was it not muddy enough? It was too muddy. Because of these turbid currents, the net he had set was washed away. Therefore, he had to do one thing: clear the turbid currents. The demons, the celestial sect, the Freemasons, and the Art Saints' forces had to be cleared up. Only after clearing them up could the situation be clear, and he could use his fists and legs. But at this moment, if someone knew what was in Li Yunxian's mind, they would definitely think that he was crazy. Because of his own current situation, he suffered serious injuries one after another. Even his realm was about to drop. Besides, the Daotong Kenzo wanted to catch him, the Freemasons wanted to catch him, and his brother's dragon son probably also wanted to catch him. Except for his own cultivation, he was almost the same as when he first entered the city of Wei. But in this situation, he began to think about clearing the turbid currents of the world. What a fool's dream. As for Li Yunxin, she had been thinking about this lunatic's ravings for a full hour. Then he smiled. At least he was not the same as when he first entered the city of Wei. At least he knew that he might be in a trap. Maybe he had broken it, maybe he hadn't. But no matter what, it must be beyond the expectation of the person who set it up. The night was getting darker, but the moonlight was getting brighter. Li Yunxin paced a few steps in the pavilion, exhaled a puff of white mist and walked out. He and Yu Ming came to the city of Little Rock on this day and checked into an inn on the mountain top. After walking along this deserted street for a quarter of an hour, he saw an old locust tree. Behind the old locust tree was the inn. However, he had only taken 5 steps when he stopped. Because he saw an ordinary peddler. He had a photographic memory, so he knew that this peddler was the one in the afternoon. He sold 2 boxes of dried fruits to Yu Ming and got a dime of silver. Then he wanted to come again, but Yu Ming was talking about the key point and Li Yunxin chased him away. The peddler was still carrying a basket with his hands in his sleeves, leaning against an old tree trunk not far from the wooden pavilion, as if he was avoiding the cold. He was young but had a weather-beaten face. Because of the cold, his face was pale, and his lips were slightly trembling. And Li Yunxin heard his stomach growling. He was hungry. But such an ordinary peddler appearing here at this time was too unusual. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and said, "What's the matter?" The peddler hurriedly straightened his body, nodded to Li Yunxin in the autumn wind, and offered a humble smile. "Yes, yes. I saw that Dragon King was in deep thought, so I didn't dare to disturb you." Dragon King. Li Yunxin repeated this word in a low voice. After a moment of silence, he laughed. "Are you from Mu Nanju?" The peddler was still smiling apologetically and nodded like a chicken pecking rice. "Yes, yes. Dragon King is wise and far-sighted, and I am from Mu Nanju." Li Yunxin slowly walked in front of him. "When I came to this city, I scanned the area, but I didn't find any Mu Nanju branches in this city. You have great magical power to be able to find me." The peddler didn't seem to hear the danger in Li Yunxin's words, and hurriedly shook his head. I don't dare. Dragon King's magical power is great. He survived the heavenly lightning of the 3 sects, and then killed Qing Kongzi. Then he annihilated the 4 major sword sects, and even made the Golden Light return in defeat. Dragon King's magical power is #1 in the world. You also know this." Li Yunxin slightly lowered his head to look at him. "You know this and you know where I am. Why don't you ask for credit from Daotong, Kenzo and Dragon Son?" "Dragon King, don't say that." The peddler laughed. "We have already agreed to cooperate with Dragon King. Previously, the Dragon King was still brooding over the fact that we stood by and did nothing. This time we don't dare to stand by and watch." Li Yunxin thought for a moment and suddenly snorted, no longer paying attention to him. He lifted his foot and walked away. The peddler hurriedly carried his basket and followed, looking like an ordinary person chasing after a customer to peddle his goods. But the words that came out of his mouth were not ordinary at all. Dragon King, listen to this little one." He followed while panting and said, "If Dragon King returns to that inn tonight, he will die tomorrow." Chapter 358. Li Yunxin stopped and turned to look at him. "Do you know what happened to those who thought I would die?" The peddler stopped and waved his hand. "Dragon King, you misunderstood me. I don't dare to be an alarmist. But what I want to say has to be told in detail from the beginning. I can't say it on the street." Then he turned his eyes and glanced at the street. "I think we can go there to talk. We can also avoid the wind and cold. To tell you the truth, Dragon King, I haven't eaten or drunk for 2 days and 2 nights in order to bring this message to Dragon King." Li Yunxin glanced at the place he was looking at. It was a wine shop. This mountain peak was actually similar to the high-end business district in Little Rock Canyon. The wine shop in this area was beautiful, but the taste was really mediocre. But on such a night, the shop had long been closed. The owner of the wine shop was not the kind of poor person who lived in the shop with his family. Perhaps he had already gone down the mountain and returned to his own house to hide from the disaster. Therefore, only one waiter was left in the shop. When Li Yunxin glanced over, he found that the waiter was leaning against the window and peeping at the street. He seemed to think that it was very strange for 2 people to stand and talk on the street at this time. One was a tall and handsome young man dressed in white, and the other was a wretched and stooped pawn peddler. These two people should not have any interaction. Seeing Li Yunxin's gaze, he quickly shrank back from the window, as if he was afraid of getting into trouble. Li Yunxin turned to look at the peddler again and smiled. "You're really brave. Let's go." After saying this, he walked a few steps to the front of the shop. The waiter was doing something inside and there was a clanging sound. But Li Yunxin waved his hand, and the door of the shop opened. Then he saw a bean-sized oil lamp on the counter. A waiter was standing next to two big tables with bedding on them. When they saw him, their faces turned ghastly pale and they were dumbfounded. "You. Who are you?" Before Li Yunxin could say anything, the peddler had already made up a story. "This Taoist master has come to the city to slay the evil. He has been eating and sleeping in the open all the way here. Why don't you go and prepare some good wine and dishes for him?" After saying that, he kicked the door shut and ran to a table by the window. First, he used his sleeves to wipe the table and the stools. Then he pulled out the stools and bowed to invite Li Yunxin to take a seat. He was acting exactly like a mortal in the secular world. Li Yunxin thought about it and sat down. The peddler grinned and stood in front of him, winking and saying, "Eating Dragon King's wine on our first meeting? Who in the world has this kind of face? I'm so lucky, so lucky." Li Yunxin smiled casually and snorted. After a moment of hesitation, he stretched out his hand and broke off the corner of the bench. So he broke off a piece of wood. Then he wiped it with his hand and it turned into shining gold. He casually threw it to the peddler. The peddler turned around and shouted at the stunned waiter, "What are you waiting for? Do you think this Taoist master will give you less money? Why aren't you getting something to eat and drink?" After saying that, he threw the gold to the waiter. When the waiter saw the gold, he was probably shocked and hurriedly tried to catch it. In the end, the gold hit his foot and he cried in pain. He knew that it was enough. But when he held it in his hand, he said blankly, "Ah, master. It's not hot anymore." The peddler sighed resentfully and scolded him, "You dumb goose. Is this your first day working? There are braised meat dishes in the kitchen. Steam them and cut them. There are dried fruits and candied fruits on a plate. Then find some seasonal vegetables and cut them into shreds. Boil them in water and add some spicy sesame oil, salt, sugar, vinegar and black and white sesame seeds to make a cold dish. If there is any good wine, hurry up and serve it. Didn't I teach you this?" The waiter listened with his mouth agape. After thinking for a while, he said, Master, I don't have dried fruits and candied fruits." The peddler took out 2 boxes from the rattan basket on the ground and slapped them on the table in front of him. "I have 2 boxes with a total of 4 coins. Take the money and go buy it quickly." The waiter was ordered around by him for no reason. After being stunned for a while, he really took out 4 coins from his pocket and gave them to the peddler. Then he timidly carried the 2 boxes and went to the kitchen. The peddler sighed and turned to Li Yunxin with a smile. He sat down next to him and said, I've made a fool of myself in front of Dragon King. These newcomers don't know any better." After watching his performance, Li Yunxin's expression softened a lot. Therefore he carefully looked at him. He realized that he wasn't actually that old. That weather-beaten face seemed to be something that had happened recently. His teeth were still snow-white, unlike many people in this era who had black and yellow decayed teeth. He smiled and said, "You seem familiar with this shop." The peddler smiled apologetically and nodded. "To tell you the truth, Dragon King, I'm from Little Rock Canyon. Dragon King can recognize my accent. My surname is Mo and my name is Mo. I used to work in this shop 10 years since I was 12, and I am now 22. Aren't you from Southernwood Residence?" "I am just a servant of Southernwood Residence. I don't have enough experience to help in the shop." The peddler, who called himself by Mo, seemed to have heard Li Yunxin's doubts and explained, "But even if he's the owner of Moon and Ju, Dragon King, we still have to eat and drink on a daily basis. I don't have any skills, so I can only serve people." Li Yunxin was slightly stunned. "Don't tell me you don't get any benefits from working for them?" Mo blinked and said, "I know what Dragon King means. However, all kinds of benefits, be it treasures or gold jade clothes, won't people like me attract attention if I wear them? Relying on my own strength to survive is the best way to not attract attention." Li Yunxin frowned and stared at him for a while. Things seemed to be different from what he had imagined. The situation of Southernwood Residence. He had thought that they would rely on money and intelligence to establish a huge network in various places. Perhaps they would use money or power for their own use. But now, looking at this fellow's situation, if what he said was true, it meant there seemed to be many people like him hiding in various places in this world. No, actually they were not hiding, they were not people from Southernwood residents who pretended to be peddlers. Instead, his real role was that of a peddler and a member of Southernwood House. Damn it. In his previous world, in history, he knew of an organization that could achieve this. Members did not seek fame or fortune. They only sought a common goal and became like-minded people. But this Southernwood residents, could they achieve this? What did they rely on? Advanced thinking. He could not help but ask, why? If there are no benefits, why work for Southernwood residents? The peddler smiled and said, Dragon King, you must know that people in this world do not do things for their own benefit. This lowly one does these things for no other reason but for the common people of this world. It was laughable to hear those words coming from his mouth. However, although he appeared humble when he said those words, his tone and eyes were sincere. It was as if he truly believed in the words for the common people of this world. Li Yunxin could not help but laugh. For the common people of this world? Is that what Southernwood residents taught you? The peddler coughed and said, Dragon King, this lowly one does think so. All right. Li Yunxin nodded. All right. Let's not talk about this for now. Since you are working here, why don't you do it? For the Dragon King. Kuomo smiled and said, this needs to be explained from the beginning. Dragon King, please. While they were talking, the waiter brought 2 plates of braised meat. One plate was braised pig head meat. It was thinly sliced and placed on a white plate. The skin on the top of the meat was slightly yellow and transparent. When he picked it up, it trembled. He imagined that it would be very chewy when he ate it. There was no fat under the skin, only lean meat. It was fragrant. Before it was served, it had been steamed for a while. Thus, a layer of fat seeped out of the meat. The other plate was braised pig ears, cut into thin strips. The 2 strips of meat were filled with crispy bones. It was tough and soft. When eaten, it made a crunching sound. When he took a sip, the meat would melt into his mouth. There were 2 small plates on the side. One was a sauce made with pepper, Sichuan pepper, chopped black and white sesame seeds, chopped peanuts and chopped almonds. The other plate was made with top-notch soy sauce and vinegar. One plate would increase the flavor and the other would remove the grease. Li Yunxin only looked at it and said, eat your food. Kuemo declined twice more before he no longer stood on ceremony. He seemed to be really hungry. He picked up 3 pieces of braised pig head meat and rolled them in the sauce. He opened his mouth and put them into his mouth. Then he poured himself a cup of tea and put it down. He picked up another 3 pieces and dipped them in the vinegar. After swallowing, he picked up a pig ear and put it into his mouth. He chewed loudly and exhaled. Dragon King, you don't know. I am so hungry that the incense in the temple is about to be cut off. But I cut off the incense offerings in this 5 Viscera temple for the sake of the Dragon King's incense offerings. Li Yunxin did not speak. He only listened to him quietly and patiently. At this point, the waiter brought the wine. But he ran away after putting it down. Kuemo glanced at him and sighed. He poured a cup for Li Yunxin and another for himself. He said, previously in Rong City, shopkeeper Wang promised the Dragon King one thing. He said he would help the Dragon King conquer Wei River. Of course we've done it. He drank a cup of wine and his tone became faster. The Dragon King must be impatient to hear how we did it. All you need to know is that right now, every town along the Wei River has a Dragon King temple dedicated to you, Dragon King. Famous painters from all over the world have been invited to paint a statue of Qi Yan in the temple, which has a little bit of spiritual light, and then sealed it in a clay statue. As long as we consecrate it, the power of faith from the believers along Wei River will continuously gather on the Dragon King. I was still working in this shop last month. Then I was assigned to the section of Wei River that flows through Yi Country, which is about 100 miles from Little Rock Canyon, to raise money for the Dragon King's temple. He sighed with a smile. It's not easy to say this clearly, so I left without saying goodbye. Perhaps the shopkeeper waited for me for a few days, but didn't see me, so he got angry and found this silly goose. Li Yunxin said, so you lost your job because of me. Kuemo hurriedly said, I don't dare to say that. The Dragon King's business is the business of the common people. But I went to build the Dragon King's temple in Yi Country, so I got the news about the Dragon King these days. At the same time, I got another piece of news. Because of this, I was bold enough to say those words of life and death to the Dragon King. Li Yunxin nodded slightly thoughtfully. Go on. Kuemo looked at the wine cup in front of Li Yunxin. Dragon King, you're not used to this wine? Li Yunxin glanced at the stool he was sitting on and the corner that was missing. I don't want to drink it. Kuemo also looked at the corner and smiled. It's like this. Dragon King should know. Once your 8 brothers know that you're being hunted and almost dead, how they'll react. They'll observe for a while first. If they feel that you still have a chance to make a comeback, maybe they won't hit you when you're down. But if they feel that you've lost all hope, they'll want you to die in their hands. Li Yunxin was silent for a while. So, you also know that Dragon Sun and the others want to combine the 9 portions of dragon energy into one. Not only do I know this, but I also know that after learning that the Dragon King was seriously injured and the Lord Dongting died, your 8 brothers and many great demons came to Yi Country and Little Rock Canyon under the pretext of Shinryu starting a war against Shenmen. Right now, this country was almost completely surrounded by the celestial sect of wonders and the demons. Now that the Dragon King has appeared in Little Rock Canyon, although it can be hidden for a while, it can't be for long. He leaned slightly closer to Li Yunxin and lowered his voice. The Daotong Kenzo and the Monster Freemasonry are looking for the Dragon King, intentionally or unintentionally. If the Dragon King ignores me tonight and spends several months to slowly recover his realm and divine power, wouldn't that be no different from death? After saying this, the dull-looking waiter served the dishes again. There was a plate of dried fruits and a plate of preserved fruits. Baimo sold them to him. There was also a plate of vegetables that he prepared himself. As he said, he cut them into shreds and scalded them with water to make them look even greener. However, this waiter was slow-witted, but his cooking seemed to be good. Without the smell of blood, it didn't look weak. As Baimo said, he added a variety of seasonings and mixed it on the table. It was crispy and very greasy. Then he stood by the table and rubbed his hands timidly. Master Taoist, what else do you want? Baimo waved his hand. Go do what you have to do. Go away. The waiter hurriedly ran away. Li Yunxin watched him drink wine and eat meat. He thought for a while. So, if I come with you tonight, what will happen? Naturally, it will be to open the spiritual light of the temples along the Wei River for the Dragon King, to let the believer's power of faith gather in the Dragon King's body and quickly recover his divine power. Yes. This seemed to be good news, very good news. However, Li Yunxin only grunted. He placed his hand on the table and slowly tapped the table with his index finger. He watched Baimo eat and drink in silence, but Baimo was also relaxed. He ate and drank for 15 minutes without stopping. The wine and dishes on the table were swept clean by him. Then he burped, poured 2 cups of cold tea and calmed down. Baimo coming to his doorstep was like sending charcoal in a snowy day. However, it was precisely because it came at the right time that Li Yunxin hesitated. This meant that the other party had been paying attention to his whereabouts and knew his movements like the back of his hand. This made him feel a little uncomfortable, but he didn't know if this uneasiness was normal. After thinking for another 15 minutes, Baimo smiled. Dragon King, the owner of Southernwood House asked me to bring a few words to the Dragon King. Li Yunxin turned to look at him. You only said it now? Baimo smiled apologetically. The owner of Southernwood House said that if the Dragon King agrees, these words don't need to be said. However, I'm afraid that the Dragon King will hesitate. If the Dragon King hesitates for 15 minutes and doesn't get up to leave, then I will speak again. Li Yunxin placed his hands on his thighs and gently inhaled. He closed his eyes and said, Speak. My owner said. Baimo's expression became solemn. He coughed lightly. At this time, you are naturally thinking that your whereabouts and actions are in our hands. You feel that you are restricted, so you are somewhat unhappy. You also feel that the timing of our gift is too coincidental, so you feel that we are both giving a gift and demonstrating our power. However, Li Yunxin, you are a smart person. You should know that there is nothing in this world that doesn't require a price. The discomfort you are feeling right now is the price you have to pay for this gift of ours. You should know. Baimo seemed to be imitating the words of the owner of Southernwood House. Thus, he even imitated the ending sound of the word, ah. What you did in the city of Wei and Dongting was just a fight with one person or a faction. That was a fight between warriors. You can handle it alone. But now you are fighting with Daotong, Kenzo, demons and the Freemasonry. This is the fight for the marquee. You should know that you can't handle it alone. Now that you are here and listening to my words, it means that you have fallen into a bad situation. At this time, only by cooperating with us and getting our support can you have the capital to participate in this fight. Otherwise, no matter how amazing your ability is, you can only become cannon fodder in this fight. When Baimo said these words, he sat upright and straightened his back. When he finished these words, his body bent again and the smile returned to his face. Dragon King, these are the original words of my master. Li Yunxin sat upright and thought for a while. He suddenly smiled and asked casually, "Is your master beautiful?" The smile that had been hanging on Bai Mo's face for a long time finally disappeared at this moment. He was stunned for a while and laughed again. "Ah, this Dragon King, how dare I comment on my master's appearance? I heard that she is beautiful?" This time Bai Mo stammered as if he really didn't know how to reply. Li Yunxin stood up and shook his head. "I heard that your master is beautiful and I yearn for her." He had always wanted to meet with a beautiful woman so that they could chat about the matters of the Mount Wu and Mount Wu. But these words, she thinks they are important, but she doesn't want to tell me personally. Of course I'm not targeting you. But asking you to pass on these words is disrespectful to me. He thought for a while with his hands behind his back and smiled. "Fight of the Mark, ooh, what a good fight of the Marquis." Then he stopped smiling and looked at Bai Mo. "I promised not to go against you and asked you to subdue Wei River as compensation. You did this and we are even. Now that you have done more, I can't accept it without doing anything. The feeling of owing a favor is a very scary thing to me. So this time, thank your master on my behalf." She said that I will become cannon fodder in this fight of the Marquis then. Li Yunxin took a deep breath. "I want to try this fight of the Marquis myself. If there is another fight for the throne in the future, if she is willing to see me personally and truly treat me as an equal ally or opponent, then we can talk." After saying this, Li Yunxin looked at the corner of the bench that he had broken and turned into gold to pay. He turned and walked out the door. Bai Mo stopped smiling. After being stunned for a while, he hurriedly said, "Dragon King, this is such a good thing. Dragon King, do you really not want it? I always stay away from good things that come to me." Li Yunxin pushed the door open. The autumn wind outside brought in the chill and fallen leaves. Seeing that he was really going to leave, Bai Mo hurriedly shouted, "Dragon King, wait a moment, Dragon King, wait a moment." Then he turned and hurriedly waved to the shop assistant, "Come here, come here." The shop assistant had been huddled in the corner, looking at the gold in his hand and playing with it. At this time, seeing Bai Mo see him, he hurriedly ran over. Master, do you have any other orders?" "Stand here and don't move." Bai Mo straightened his body and ordered him. At the same time he strode to the shop assistant's side and raised his hand, right hand on the shop assistant's forehead, left hand supporting his chin. Just as the shop assistant was about to ask what was going on, Bai Mo's arm exerted force. With a crisp cracking sound, the shop assistant fell down softly. Then Bai Mo rushed into the kitchen like a gust of wind and ran out again. He threw the 2 empty boxes into the shop assistant's rattan basket. Then he took out 4 coins from his bosom and threw them on the shop assistant's corpse. Then he lifted the basket and raised his head to look at Li Yunxin. "Dragon King, think about this again. My master really didn't mean to disrespect Dragon King on purpose." Li Yunxin looked at him silently and then at the shop assistant's corpse on the ground. Bai Mo followed his gaze and casually said, "Tonight's situation is special. He will definitely remember us. Tomorrow he will know it was me when he tells the innkeeper. We will attract attention. But Dragon King, please think twice. Dragon King cooperating with us is not only for Dragon King himself, but also for the well-being of the people in the world." However, Li Yunxin stared at the shop assistant's corpse on the ground for a while and suddenly laughed softly. Bai Mo didn't know why he laughed. However, Li Yunxin laughed and shook his head. He strode out of the wine shop and onto the street. Bai Mo hurriedly chased after him. However, although Li Yunxin seemed to be walking slowly, his speed was extremely fast. In just 2 or 3 breaths, he disappeared at the end of the street. Afraid of alarming the people on the street, Bai Mo didn't dare to shout loudly. He could only run a few steps silently and finally gave up. On the long street, the night wind whimpered. In the wind, he heard Li Yunxin mutter something. He didn't hear it very clearly, but he felt that it might be a sentence without any rhyme or reason. "Ah, so damn evil." Chapter 359. Just these 2 words? Really dark? The woman reclined on a comfortable and soft recliner. Her fingertips, which seemed to be carved from jade, slowly moved across the colorful fruits on the fruit plate on the small table beside her. Then she picked up a plump red fruit and brought it to her mouth, gently biting it with her pearly white teeth. The dim yellow candlelight reflected the color of her red lips and the red fruit. It was so beautiful that it looked like blood was about to drip out. Bai Mo lowered his head and stood at the door of the room. His back was against the closed door and he stared at his toes. "There are some other words. I'm just afraid that I'll disturb Master's hearing." "Say it." The woman used her left arm to prop up her upper body. Her round snow-white shoulders and straight collarbone were faintly discernible under the gauze, and even revealed a soul-stirring arc below. In this quiet and warm room, Baimo heard the rustling sound of the soft material of the clothes. He could imagine how beautiful the body under the material of the clothes was. But as soon as this thought appeared in his heart, he immediately extinguished it. He felt ashamed that he had thought of this. This made his breathing heavier. He bit the tip of his tongue hard as a punishment, and then tasted blood in his mouth. Then he controlled his breathing and said as calmly as possible in a low voice, "What he said is, really King Dark." The woman was silent for a while and then she burst out laughing. She sat up from the recliner, and like a young girl in her budding years, she put her feet together and put her hands on the chair obediently. Yes, this is what he should say. Her mood seemed to improve. So, she reached out and picked up a half-peeled pomegranate from the fruit plate. She tilted her head slightly to pick up the pomegranate seeds, and her black hair cascaded down the side of her face like a waterfall. She picked up 3 or 4 seeds and threw them on the table. She seemed to be talking to herself. So he's still staring at the corner of the chair? Baimo waited for a while to make sure that the woman was talking to him. So he lowered his head again. Yes, but I don't understand. Sigh. The woman sighed softly. Her breath smelled like orchids. If you could understand, you wouldn't have killed that person. Cold sweat immediately seeped out of Baimo's forehead. His chest felt tight and his heart pounded. He felt sweat on his back, hot and itchy, as if he were being pricked by countless tiny needles. I did it wrong? I did it wrong? He said quickly in his mind. Why? Where did I go wrong? She's disappointed in me. Master, please tell me, he said stiffly from his lips. But then he felt that his tone was too harsh, so he hurriedly added, I'll do my best to remedy the situation. There's nothing to remedy. The woman, or Taoish Qingshui, or the owner of Southernwood residence, narrowed her eyes and thought for a while. This added to her charm. But let me tell you something. The next time you see him, don't make the same mistake again. Next time. This word caused Wu Mo's heart to suddenly surge with an uncontrollable ecstasy. She is not completely disappointed in me. He spoke to himself quickly in his mind. He held his breath and said, yes. Taoish Qingshui put down the pomegranate and stood up. She walked barefoot on the thick and soft carpet in the house slowly, as if she was taking a stroll on the fragrant grass. When he entered the wine shop with you, he broke the corner of the stool under his body and cast a spell to turn it into gold to pay for the wine, right? Yes. Then he didn't eat or drink. The woman smiled. It's so cold at night in autumn. You and I both know that he's a foodie. That's why you invited him to the wine shop to make him relax, right? Yes. Then have you ever thought about the relationship between paying the bill with a deceptive piece of wood and not drinking? Baimo was stunned. He quickly blinked his eyes for a while, then said in disbelief, Master, you mean he didn't want to eat the food and wine that he didn't pay with real money? What do you think? Baimo was stunned for a while and murmured, but he's Li Yunxin. What he did in the past. Yes. What you're thinking makes sense. Taoish Qingshui responded gently, he's a demon. He doesn't show mercy when it comes to harming people, and he doesn't show mercy when it comes to killing people. It's reasonable for you to be doubtful. But you should also be clear. A vicious bandit might be a filial son. A horse gang might kill an entire family for a few taels of silver, but it's also possible for him to pity a strange girl under the hooves of the horse. Baimo, a bad person won't be completely bad. A good person won't be completely good either. Some bad people have their own principles. She smiled, and he's not a bad person. He's just a shrewd person. He has his own principles and small bigotry. Baimo thought for a long time and said, in a daze? In fact, he still couldn't understand. You can't understand. Taoish Qingshui sighed, it's not your fault. You were born at such a time. You didn't meet many people, so your vision wasn't broad. His emotions are hard to be understood by most people in this world. Baimo lowered his head even more. So, if you understood his thoughts at that time, you'd know what kind of person he is. His personal feelings are very heavy. But not the personal feelings of a man and a woman. Taoish Qingshui walked silently to the table on the other side of the room, picked up the silver hairpin on the table, and picked up the candle flower. Then you killed the waiter. She shook her head lightly, it's not your fault. Your view of good and evil is still very simple. You think what you're doing is for the future of the world, for the common people. So, you sacrifice this little person in front of you. You don't have any psychological burden. You're a smart person but your vision is limited, you don't think much and you can't come in contact with more progressive. She gave an inexplicable chuckle as she said the word. Then she continued, more progressive, more civilized, and the view that Li Yunxin might not accept but is used to. Ba Mo didn't make a sound. Looking at him, Taoish Qingshui raised her hand and patted her forehead. Oh, you're getting more and more confused. Then let's put it this way, Li Yunxin thinks that demons don't treat humans as humans. He thinks that Daotong Kenzo doesn't treat humans as humans either. He thinks that the Freemasonry doesn't treat humans as humans either. Now that he sees you again, you say that you're doing it for the common people, but you don't hesitate to kill. He naturally thinks that Mu Nanju doesn't treat humans as humans either. So, the so-called rulers and righteous in the world don't treat humans as humans? How dark is this world? Ba Mo sighed softly. He understood. So, don't kill people like this anymore. Taoish Qingshui turned to look at him. It's good to have a firm belief. But to do evil in the name of faith, isn't that a cult? Ba Mo bowed to the ground. I'll listen to Master's teachings. However, Taoish Qingshui didn't ask him to get up. She only asked him to continue bowing and put the silver hairpin back on the table. But he doesn't blame you for not wanting our help. No matter how careful you are, as long as he has that intention he will still leave. This Li Yunxin is very arrogant. She smiled and shook her head as if feeling helpless for a young man who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. In fact, in terms of age, Li Yunxin had only lived for a total of 16 years in this world. He was considered a proper young man. But to be arrogant at this time is willful. She thought again and seemed to be talking to herself. He thinks that he can rely on his own ability. Under such circumstances. I'm afraid that even if he doesn't die, he will lose miserably. Ba Mo maintained the posture of bowing down and said with difficulty, I will go to him again tomorrow, to make up for my mistake. No need. Taoish Qingshui straightened his arms, put his hands behind his back and took 2 steps. It's time to let him know the reality. It's time to let him taste the feeling of a crushing defeat. This time we helped him in his hour of need but he didn't want it. So, let's wait for him to help him in his hour of need. At that time we will really save his life and he will want it. As for now, let's open up his temples. Taoish Qingshui blinked. We said that we will help him conquer Wei River, so these temples will also be included in the agreement. He wants to be clear about his own interests, so do we? Then, I can slowly watch the show. To see how his pride is slowly worn down in the difficult situation. Think about it, it's also very interesting. Taoish Qingshui showed a mischievous smile on his face. He wants to be an equal ally with me. He is really an imaginative child. When Li Yunxin returned to the inn where he and Yu Meng were staying, the lights inside and outside were almost out. 2 waiters were keeping watch in the corner with a small oil lamp, but they looked very nervous. It seemed that they would not be able to sleep tonight. So he did not show himself. Instead, he used some of the demon power that was very precious to him to transform into the body of Yin Spirit and pass through the door. Their room was on the 3rd floor, facing the cliff on the side of the small stone mountain. There were only 4 rooms and they were all booked by Yu Meng. When Li Yunxin arrived at the corridor on the 3rd floor like a gust of wind, he saw Yu Meng holding a candle and looking into his room. He appeared behind Yu Meng and asked in a low voice, "What are you looking at?" Yu Meng's hand trembled slightly when he suddenly heard such a voice behind him, and the candle swayed for a while. Then he turned around and saw Li Yunxin. He let out a sigh. "I came to ask you, what are your plans for the next few days?" Li Yunxin could vaguely hear the sound of the guests walking on the floor, coughing and spitting. He pushed the door open and said, "Let's talk inside." In this era, even the best inns were not good at soundproofing. The 3rd floor was mostly made of wood. According to the standard of his previous world, it was like a window paper. The 2 entered the door. Li Yunxin drew an oval, a semicircle and a line in the air. Then a small oil lamp fell on the table with a clang, whirled twice and lit up. The oil lamp he drew was much brighter than the candle in Yu Meng's hand, and there was no smoke. In an instant, the room was as bright as day. Yu Meng looked at the candle in his hand and blew it out. Then he slightly frowned. You better not use your demon power. You are a Yin god. Once your demon power is exhausted, your realm will drop. Li Yunxin only smiled and walked to the bed. He didn't put a quilt on it and sat cross-legged on it. It looked like he was going to breathe and adjust his breath. Yu Meng sat in front of the table and thought for a while. I'm not trying to rush you. I also know that it will consume a lot of demon power for you to use the method of turning illusions into reality. But I don't want them to have magical bodies. I just want them to be strong and ordinary people. So I'm asking you, what are your plans for the next few days? Right now, the demons and the people from the celestial sect have arrived near Little Stone City. Yi country will soon become the battlefield of the world. In my opinion, the safest and wisest way is to find a place to hide from the world. You should adjust your breath and recover your demon power. Then we can make a long-term plan. Then tomorrow I will go to my second brother's place. Li Yunxin closed his eyes and said softly. Yu Meng was stunned. When Li Yunxin said this, it was as if his second brother lived next door and was gentle and kind. He said it very casually. Why did you change your mind? He frowned. You should know your current situation. If you go to see your second brother, what will happen to you? Do you want to send a sheep to the tiger's mouth? Li Yunxin slightly raised the corner of his mouth, which could be considered as a smile. With his eyes still closed, he said, Tomorrow I won't be the same today. Maybe I won't be the same today in a few hours. After saying these words that sounded like a riddle, he calmly began to regulate his breathing. Yu Ming thought for a while and stood up. You said that tomorrow your demon power will recover. A little. Li Yunxin said. You thought for a whole night outside, and thought of a way? Yu Ming sounded a little surprised. In fact, anyone who heard this news would be surprised. A true realm demon who was seriously injured and had almost used up all of his demon power could recover in one night. If he didn't know Li Yunxin, he would think that Li Yunxin had gone crazy. Yes, I thought of a way. Li Yunxin said lightly, but my way needs more time, more twists and turns, and is very risky. But tonight someone sent me a good thing. Then he told Yu Ming about the good news, that he could tell her in detail. Yu Ming frowned and thought for a while. You mean, you rejected it? But now, I feel that they will definitely consecrate your Dragon King temple at the Wei River to help you recover your demonic power. So, you gave up on the method you had thought of before and decided to use this more convenient method. Yes, you can understand it that way. Since you have accepted it now, why did you reject it before? Li Yunxin smiled. It's a matter of attitude, of principle. As for accepting it, it's because I'm not a stubborn person. You can actually say this in such a dignified way. Yu Ming was silent for a while. Fine. That means this is only your speculation. And based on this speculation, you told me that you will meet your second brother tomorrow. However, he had never thought about what if his conjecture was wrong? For example, the owner of Southern Wuju will take away your Wei River in a fit of anger? It shouldn't be wrong. Li Yunxin shrugged. I think I can guess what she is thinking. You have to let me calm down. I have to use my snow mountain and ocean of qi. If she opens the temple and the power of wish rushes in and hurts my meridians, it will be troublesome. Maybe it was because of the two girls. Yu Ming became a little impatient. He frowned. I mean, if you guessed her thoughts wrong, you should have a second plan. Now is not the time to take risks. Li Yunxin suddenly opened his eyes. So Yu Ming stopped talking. He saw a flash of golden light in Li Yunxin's eyes. And at this moment, a subtle change happened in the room. It was as if there was an invisible force coming from afar, from the cracks of the window, from the door, and even from under the carpet. Then it merged into Li Yunxin's body. Yu Ming had a feeling. If the Li Yunxin of the past few days was a jar that looked fine on the outside but was actually empty on the inside, then at this time, there were thousands of tiny streams of water converging into this jar. He opened his mouth slightly. Li Yunxin smiled calmly. I have said. I think I understand what she is thinking. She also understands me. Chapter 360. This was the power of hope that came from the Wei River. It was night time, so not many people would go to the temple to worship. But the light opening of Moon Anju might have created some miraculous scene, which reminded people of the Dragon King in the nearby temple. This was done beautifully. What was surprising was that there were very few people cultivating in Moon Anju. But they had done it in such a short time. Even if Li Yunxin built his own temple and opened the light, he might not be able to do it so efficiently. This meant that they had amazing organizational and mobilization abilities. Although the power of hope produced by the unstable beliefs was still very thin, it was a life-saving nectar for Li Yunxin's almost dried-up ocean of qi and snow. The wounds on his body began to slowly close and heal. His muscles became strong and powerful again. His demon power began to circulate in his meridians again. Every time he circulated it, his body would be filled with more vitality. Li Yunxin let out a breath and looked at Yu Ming. He saw him holding a candle and walking out the door, then gently closing the door. So he closed his eyes and flicked his finger. The oil lamp on the table that he drew out of thin air went out. The room became pitch black. Only the sound of Li Yunxing's long and gentle breathing could be heard, like a giant beast that had been hibernating underground for thousands of years. The night passed without incident. At dawn the next day, the people in the city had calmed down a lot. Yesterday the demons killed many people, so people were afraid that they would come again at night. But after a night of fear and trepidation, nothing terrible happened. Therefore, although he still harbored some misgivings about the future, his state of mind was somewhat more stable. The people who had been making a ruckus at the four gates for the night slowly dispersed, and the streets were once again filled with people. But the atmosphere of fear dissipated, followed by the atmosphere of sadness. It pervaded the entire city, making it hard for people to breathe. Yu Ming got up early, went downstairs to ask for some snacks, and then went to knock on Li Yunxing's door. After knocking for a while and no one answered, he pushed the door open. He found that there was no one inside. At this time, a donkey was walking on a mountain road more than 30 kilometers away from Little Rock Canyon. The donkey looked very strange. It had an oval-shaped head, an oval-shaped body, 4 firewood-like legs, and a thread-like tail. His big black eyes were dull, but he could still recognize the way. It looked like it had been drawn by a child. But even though the donkey looked strange, it walked steadily and quickly. It didn't seem to run, but it just walked step by step, and the bushes on both sides of the field moved back. It was even faster than the handsome horse. This was because this strange-looking donkey was very big. How big? If a strong adult man were to lie flat on its back, he would only be able to occupy half of its body. Its body was large, and its 4 slender legs were even longer. It was at least 20 feet tall, almost as tall as a 3-story wooden building. Even if an elephant were to come, it would only be able to stand under its belly. Now it was walking silently on the road. The mouth on its head was pursed into a smiling arc. Although it was smiling, people who saw it would feel a chill down their spines. But in fact, there were only a few people who noticed the donkey. This place was northeast of Little Rock Canyon, and there were golden fields on both sides of the road. The wheat had already been milked and only needed to be harvested in a few days. According to reason, there should be someone looking after it at this time, but there was no one. It was said that there were often ferocious beasts coming out of the forest to eat people, so the people outside the city were as anxious as the people inside. Among the wheat fields and bushes, there were already several pairs of eyes staring at the strange donkey and the person on it. They stared at the donkey until it reached Crow's Mouth. Crow's Mouth was a small mountain pass. On both sides were towering canyons that were several hundred meters high. Standing at the foot of the mountain and looking up, they felt that the cliff was so steep that it seemed like it would collapse at any moment. This place was the main road from the north of Yi Country to Little Rock Canyon. The red stone gorge behind Crow's Mouth meandered through the mountains for dozens of miles and branched off into countless branches. It had always been a place occupied by ferocious beasts and bandits. It was early morning, and the chill of the night had not yet dissipated. The wind blowing out from the Crow's Mouth was cold, and it carried a fishy smell that was difficult for ordinary people to detect. The vines and trees on both sides of the mountain walls had already withered and turned yellow. The dry and brittle leaves rustled in the wind, and patches of withered grass fell to the ground, like the messy hair of a madman. The strange donkey didn't stop and walked straight in. Although the donkey was tall, the cliffs on both sides were even taller. After walking a few dozen steps forward, the vast expanse of blue sky above was reduced to a narrow line. The sun shone miserly from the top, but it was of no use. The canyon was gloomy as if it was dawn or evening again. After walking for another quarter of an hour, the road ahead became even narrower. At this time the donkey could only walk forward and could no longer turn around. As a result, strange howls suddenly sounded from both sides of the mountain walls. The sound didn't sound like that of a wild beast or a savage. Instead, it sounded like some kind of monster. Following that, large clouds of dust erupted from the mountain walls. It seemed that there were more than a dozen figures running on the mountain walls at high speed, and the strength of their feet was so great that the trees growing on the cliff were kicked to pieces, and the rocks were also kicked to pieces. The dust poured down like a torrential rain. These vigorous and ferocious figures finally landed in the canyon in front of the strange donkey. By the time the dust settled, they could see their faces. They were more than a dozen, 8 to 9 feet tall, burly and strong, green-faced mountain ghosts with exposed fangs. There were all kinds of legends about the origin of mountain ghosts among the people. Some said that they were the souls of those who had been eaten by ferocious beasts in the mountains, but they weren't captured by Black by Yanjun, so they wandered the world. After wandering for a long time, they gradually harmed the tourists in the mountains and became mountain ghosts. Others said that they were the soldiers of the mountain god, who specialized in investigating the injustice that happened in the wilderness. They would kill both good and evil people. Now, looking at their appearance, it seemed that the latter theory was more likely, because they were all wearing armor. The most burly mountain ghost in the front was wearing a rusty chain armor. There seemed to be blood in the gaps of the armor, but it had already dried and turned black. The armor probably didn't belong to him in the past. It was almost torn apart by his burly body, so he had to use leather belts to tie it around his shoulders and ribs. He held a steel mace in his hand, but unfortunately many of the iron spikes on the mace were broken, as if he had experienced a fierce battle. The dozen or so mountain ghosts behind him were wearing leather armor, and they were also swaying due to the weight of their thick bodies. However, they seemed to be organized. When they landed, the leader of the mountain ghosts stuck out his fat, scarlet tongue and licked his fangs. He said in an angry voice, "Where are you from, friends? Where are you going? This place has been occupied by my king. This is a military stronghold. Quickly report your name." If a cultivator saw this scene, he would definitely be shocked. Not to mention the fact that these demons were actually wearing standard leather armor. Just the words they spoke were enough to make people's jaws drop. They actually spoke such human language, and it sounded a little courteous. Although they were tall and burly compared to the strange donkey, they were dwarfs. They only reached the donkey's knee. After they stopped the road and spoke, the man on the donkey stood up and snorted, "Where did these small fish come from? Who is your king?" As soon as the man on the donkey appeared, the dozen or so demons immediately became noisy and shouted angrily, "It's a man! It's a stinky Taoist priest!" They all stepped forward and were about to pounce. Only stinky Taoist priests wear white. Stinky Taoist priests also like to ride donkeys. But there were also some who said, "This donkey isn't a stinky Taoist priest's donkey. It's a strange donkey. It's a strange Taoist priest." These little demons didn't speak, but they were gloomy and fierce. But now that they were speaking, they revealed the stupid and confused look of these little fiendish demons. The leader of the mountain ghosts stared at the man on the donkey for a while and was in a daze. It seemed that he had memorized the words he just said. Now that he suddenly saw a man standing on the donkey and not a demon, he was at a loss. When he heard the noise of the little demons behind him, he was anxious and annoyed. Suddenly he became ruthless, grabbed the head of a demon beside him, and smashed it on the ground, smashing the brain into pieces. Then he stomped on the ground and shouted, "Hey, Taoist priest! Hey, kill!" After saying these words, he was the first to rush forward. Seeing this, the demons behind him were overjoyed and swarmed forward as well. For a moment, the narrow and dark canyon was filled with smoke and dust. It seemed that there was no way to avoid it. They were only a dozen steps away from the strange donkey. They rushed forward ferociously, and in just 2 breaths, they reached the foot of the donkey, waving their sticks and fists. But at this moment, the strange donkey suddenly lowered its head as fast as lightning. The mouth on its head was originally closed, forming a smiling arc. But at this moment, its mouth suddenly opened. But what was revealed was not the big front teeth of a donkey, but 2 neat rows of triangular white teeth. These tusks were half the height of the mountain ghost. And when the donkey opened its mouth, it was in a semicircle, and it was smiling. This scene looked even more horrifying than before. The 8 or 9 mountain ghosts at the front didn't stop in time and were swallowed by the donkey. When the 2 rows of triangular tusks opened and closed, severed limbs, internal organs, and flesh fell to the ground. The blood flowed like a waterfall. These mountain ghosts could speak, and in terms of cultivation level, they were all at the emptiness realm. And their bodies were already very strong. But in the mouth of the strange donkey that was full of tusks, they were like rotten meat that couldn't be chewed. When the 3 or 4 mountain ghosts saw this scene, they immediately turned around and ran without any reluctance. As they ran, they wailed like ghosts and howled like wolves, "Strange Taoist, strange donkey, food is coming, food is coming." This voice echoed in the narrow and winding valley, startling the birds on both sides of the mountain walls and causing them to fly up in flocks, as if they were a huge dark cloud. But the donkey raised its head and continued to move forward. Just like that, they walked for an hour. Speaking of which, the Red Stone Gorge looked like it was occupied by demons. In these 2 hours they encountered 3 groups of patrolling demons. Some beasts became spirits and attained Tao, and some spirits cultivated to the realm of truth. But no matter what kind of demon it was, the donkey would open its mouth and eat it. Its tusks were sharp, and the emptiness realm demons were chewed to pieces in its mouth. In the end, it encountered a realm of the outer fringe and it was trampled to death by the donkey. It died an extremely wrong death. After these 2 hours they finally reached the first fork in the Redstone Gorge. On the left was the great gorge that led to the south of Yi country, and on the right was the fork that was overgrown with weeds. At the top of the cliff next to the fork, a man in a golden robe suddenly appeared. So the strange donkey stopped and the man on the donkey also stood up. The man in the golden robe had a golden crown on his head. His eyes were blue and his figure was tall and mighty. Who else could it be but Long Ertzi Hatred? Hatred stared at the man on the donkey's back for a while. Then he said loudly, "Ninth brother, where did you find this donkey? What a great fire. It ate dozens of demon soldiers under second brother's command along the way. These will all belong to you in the future, ninth brother." Li Yunxin, who was on the donkey's back, raised his head and squinted his eyes to look at him. Hatred was standing on the cliff. The light from the sky made his figure blurry, and only a rough outline could be seen. He smiled coldly and said loudly, "It's not that I want to be rude. It's just that the demon soldiers under second brother's command shouted to kill me when they saw me. If I didn't know that second brother is a gentle and honest brother, I would have thought that it was because second brother wanted to take my life, and that's why the demon soldiers were so fearless. For the sake of second brother's reputation, they simply let the donkey eat them all." Hatred laughed 3 times and jumped down from the cliff. He landed on a big rock that protruded out of the cliff beside Li Yunxin. This jump was very heavy and the big green rock gave out a dull and heavy thud. The sound seemed to be transmitted to the inside of the mountain. The surface of the green rock also immediately showed dense spider web patterns, making a series of crisp sounds like popping beans. In this sound, Hatred looked at Li Yunxin with a smile. He tilted his head and looked around. "Second brother, I heard that ninth brother was caught by Kenzo at the border of Qingye country, and they had a big fight. I also heard that ninth brother was seriously injured, and his realm almost dropped. But now it seems that ninth brother is still energetic. But is he okay inside? If not, just tell second brother. Now that I'm here, I'll be in a comfortable place." Li Yunxin put his hands behind his back and smiled. After a moment of silence he said, "What second brother heard is true. I am really seriously injured and my realm is about to drop. Besides, I was driven out of Dongting and there is no room for business planning. I am almost at the end of my road." Hearing this, Hatred's eyes lit up, so bright that it was scary. His body leaned forward slightly, like a hungry man smelling the scent of delicious food. He narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Really?" Chapter 361. Really? Li Yunxin smiled again, "But it's all in the past. Fortunately, the true dragon left a treasure for me. Now, my injuries have mostly recovered and just like what second brother saw, a donkey that I casually made is quite a capable general. I heard that you invited Princess Golden Rock and Princess Dongting to be your guests, so I came here on the donkey. I want to give this donkey to Princess Golden Rock as a gift." The light in Hatred's eyes dimmed. He seemed to be very disappointed. He moved the corner of his mouth. "Shinryu's treasure?" Li Yunxin smiled again. He paused for a while and said, "Do you remember you told me that Shinryu wanted to take back the Dragon Chi?" Before Hatred could speak, Li Yunxin said, "But Shinryu also told me, among the 9 dragon sons, there will be someone who wants to combine the Dragon Chi. Jinlong also said that second brother, you've been making a lot of moves recently so I'm afraid you're the most ambitious. She was afraid that I would be harmed by you so she gave me a treasure to protect me. With that treasure I was able to repel the golden photon." Li Yunxin sighed slightly. "You must have seen the golden photon. Didn't you find that she was seriously injured? That's because I used that treasure to forcefully extract the sword sect magic treasure that was refined within her body." Speaking up to this point, Li Yunxin's tone became harsher. He turned his hand and showed the glazed sword. "Let me see, this is the treasure of the Kenzo." Hatred frowned. He stared at the glazed sword and then at Li Yunxin. His face gradually showed, as if he was suppressing his anger. "Ninth brother, I heard it clearly. Ninth brother, do you think that I will kill you and steal your dragon soul while you are heavily injured? That's why you said all these things. You brought out the treasures of Shinryu, and rode this strange donkey around my valley to make me think that you're fine?" Hatred glared at him angrily. "You hurt second brother's feelings too much." Li Yunxin quickly waved his hand and said sincerely, "Second brother, what are you talking about? Younger brother was injured and second brother was the first to rush over. Isn't that enough to prove that our brotherhood is stronger than gold? In my heart, I have no ill feelings towards second brother at all. However, hatred still looked at him angrily for a while before shaking his head and sighing, "Forget it. Let's just forget about it." He stretched out his hand to Li Yunxin and said, "Come, follow me to the camp so that you can meet your brother Qionyou's messenger. Your eldest brother and the other brothers and sisters are also on their way here." Alas, those stupid Taoist priests on Cloud Mountain. They took advantage of the time when my demon power had not recovered and rushed down to occupy my Tongtian Lake. Now I can only gather the big and small demon kings in Yi country and set up a camp here. When your other brothers and sisters arrive, we will kill our way back to Cloud Mountain. So, Li Yunxin snapped his fingers and jumped on the big green stone that hatred was standing on. Then the scary donkey he was riding suddenly turned into a green light and disappeared. A piece of talisman floated down from the air and was put into his sleeve. The two brothers looked at each other and smiled. Hand in hand, they walked into the depths of the canyon amicably, along with the clouds. Yazi said that he had gathered all the demons in the Yi country. However, Li Yunxin stood on the cloud and could not see anyone. The mountains on both sides of the Redstone Canyon were undulating, and from time to time revealed towering peaks made up of huge naked red rocks. Some were almost deep into the clouds and some were like long waterfalls. Although it was autumn, the trees on the mountain were yellow and green. But looking at such a vast and magnificent scene, he did not feel desolate at all. He only felt broad-minded and wanted to float to the sky. But he could not see the demon camp that hatred mentioned. As if seeing his doubt, hatred laughed. "Ninth brother, you have not experienced the war between the demons and Xianmen, so it is normal that you do not know." He moved forward on the cloud and pointed. "According to the eyes of the secular people, this is a terrain that is easy to defend and difficult to attack. The Redstone Canyon is winding in the Manjiao Mountains, and the Manjiao Mountains are not so much mountains but a large raised plateau. These peaks seem to be only 200 or 300 meters high, but together with the plateau below, it is 1,000 meters high. Since the highland is surrounded by precipitous cliffs, the mortal army is able to guard the Redstone Gorge in the middle of the mountain, and the area above it is a paradise. But ninth brother, you must know that mortals can only run on the ground. Us demons and Yin spirits as well as the cultivators of Xianmen, can all fly. Therefore if the camp is set up on the ground and the enemy comes to suppress us in the air, wouldn't we be at a disadvantage? Because of this, the nest of Xianmen is on the Cloud Mountain, in the sky. As for us, we are either in the cave or in the pool of water. Or we are underground." At this point, hatred suddenly pressed down on the cloud, and the two suddenly plunged into the vast mountains. It was also at this time that Li Yunxin saw a huge bottomless pit on the ground. As the wind whistled in his ears, Li Yunxin suddenly felt that this pit was a bit familiar. As soon as this thought came to his mind, hatred had already rushed down with him. From the sky, this pit was not very big. It was about the size of a few big houses and it went straight up and down. But after descending for a while, the space below suddenly became bigger. It turned out to be a huge underground cave, covered in darkness on all sides, and he did not know where the end was. Dozens of meters underground was the ground. There was fire on the ground. The fire stretched endlessly, coiling into a circle, very much like the appearance of an army. Previously, when hatred said in the sky that he had gathered the big and small demon kings in the Yi country to form an army, Li Yunxin only thought that it was a group of bandits. After all, he knew the stubborn temperament of the demons. How much prestige and deterrence would he need to have these irascible and stupid fellows under his control? But now, hatred seemed to have really done it. Each flame was a bonfire, and a dozen or so figures were faintly visible around the fire, as well as some tents, bedding, and the like. The distance between the bonfires was actually close, and the size of the bonfires was also different. This was because demons were not ordinary people and they were not all the same size. They were not even all with a pair of eyes, 2 arms, a nose and so on. In fact, it was a parade of demons and ghosts. These demons were all different in appearance and clothing. Under the leadership of the big and small demon kings, they gathered together, and the noise almost made the two people in the sky somersault. And the smell was not pleasant, very much like a smelly livestock market. Because of their stupid minds and violent tempers, there were often conflicts. Li Yunxin glanced around and saw at least 3 bonfires knocked over by the fighting little demons. Some screamed because of the heat, some clapped their hands and laughed. Some became violent because they were affected, and they could not help but break up and join the battle. After a while there were 3 small disturbances. But the disturbances came quickly and it seemed to go quickly. In an instant, demons of a higher level patrolled over, and they did not ask the reason. they grabbed one and tore it alive. If there was still one who did not obey, they tore another one. This bloody method was more effective than any reason and rules. The group of demons who were fighting with each other earlier immediately burst into laughter and scattered like birds and beasts. Such a scene played out continuously in this vast underground space. Li Yunxin realized that in less than a quarter of an hour, more than a dozen demons died because of this kind of thing. Such a way to die, wouldn't that mean that most of them would die very soon? Hatred seemed to see his doubt again and smiled. These good-for-nothing fools. There are a lot of them, much more than those stinky Taoist priests. Look here, it's actually just a camp that I've gathered. There are already 1,000 people here. In other places there are 5 more camps like this. He usually said to go to the east. There were fewer fires in the east and it was quieter. There was even a surging underground river which made the sound of water. He and Li Yunxin landed by the water's edge. Looking ahead, they saw that on the flat ground covered with gravel, against the dark background, there stood a magnificent palace with flying eaves. Li Yunxin was a little surprised and knew that this thing should be transformed from some magic weapon. So he gently let out a breath, put his hand into his sleeve, and touched the other treasure he hid, Fog-Locked Toad Palace. Walking into someone else's magic weapon was not a wise move. He had to at least leave a way out for himself. This hatred affectionately held his hand, pulling him to the palace, and continued to say, "There are a lot of these fools. But as you can see, there are dozens of people dying in the infighting every day. If they are stationed in one place like a mortal army for a few months, it is possible that most of them will die, or they will not be able to restrain themselves from killing each other. But fortunately we don't need to stay here for long." Cloud Mountain. Hatred stopped on the stairs in front of the palace and turned to look at Li Yunxin. "Ninth brother, do you know about Cloud Mountain?" Li Yunxin tried to pull his hand out slightly. But Hatred's wrist was like an iron hoop, as if he was afraid that he would run away. He smiled. "Second brother, are you talking about the Cloud Mountain that descends once every 500 years will land in your Tongtian Lake?" Hatred laughed. "Good ninth brother, you actually know about it. So it must be because of this that he knew about it. That Cloud Mountain will only stay on the ground for about 10 days. If we want to use these demon soldiers, it will only take about 10 days. During this period of time, as long as they are not all dead and can be used, we don't need to care about them anymore." After saying this, they went up the stairs. When they reached the last step, Li Yunxin saw the inside of the palace. This huge cave was gloomy, like a crescent moon night. But this palace was brightly lit and it was warm. The floor was covered with a scarlet carpet, and the walls were decorated with pictures of gold. Maids and servants walked to and fro in the wide and magnificent hall, which was more magnificent than the palace of a human emperor. But this was very much in line with his second brother's dressing style. Only then did Hatred let go of Li Yunxin's hand and looked at him. "Ninth brother, do you want to take revenge? The hatred of being chased by Daotong and Kenzo?" Li Yunxin's heart jumped slightly. He was thinking about how to open his mouth so that he could take the first step. His first step was to unravel the noose. So he lowered his head in silence for a while and then raised his head again. But this time, the expression on his face had become very serious and sincere, and the aura on his body was suddenly restrained, as if he was about to make a difficult decision. "Second brother, you should be relieved. You should be relieved now." He said this sentence without any rhyme or reason, and then seriously looked into Yazi's eyes. Hatred was slightly stunned. But then he smiled and his eyes were playful. "What do you mean?" "I have come to second brother's camp, and also to second brother's magic weapon." Li Yunxin took a breath in relief. "Right now my life is in your hands. It's time for us to have a frank talk." "Ninth brother, what are you saying? There is no benefit in swallowing me." Li Yunxin ignored his words and interrupted him stiffly. "It is very disadvantageous to second brother. However, I, your ninth younger brother, have a way that satisfies both sides. I can make my second elder brother a great monster that can fight against true dragons and rock kings as equals, and I can save my own life. Second brother, do you want to hear it?" Hatred maintained his smile and stared into Li Yunxin's eyes for a while. Then the smile on his face turned into a faint sneer. "Ninth brother, you think I want to swallow you? Well, let's think of it this way. In this way, what good idea do you want to tell second brother?" As he said this, the tip of his tongue flashed across his lips. Li Yunxin didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that his mouth seemed to have become a little bigger. However, he was not flustered. He just smiled faintly. "Second brother, please think about it. We are just a quarter of the original dragon breath of Shinryu. Shinryu hid half of the dragon breath in Dongting. Then he used the remaining half to divide us. Second brother, even if you worked hard to combine the 9 parts of the dragon breath into one, what can you do? It is just equivalent to the current Shinryu. Li Yunxin shook his head. I also know that second brother caught the princess of Dongting for the dragon breath in her body. But second brother, think about it again, even if you swallow the princess of Dongting, it is not as good as Shinryu in its heyday. Shinryu. Li Yunxin raised his hand like an impassioned speaker. With another hand behind his back, he paced a few steps in front of the hall and turned his head. When Shinryu was born, there was a real dragon breath. So what? Did you subdue all the monsters in the world? Maybe you did. But didn't you still fight with the Golden Rock King? Furthermore, second brother had spent so much effort just to become the Lord of the Demons? Now, Xianmen wants to eliminate the monsters. Second brother has to deal with not only the monsters but also Xianmen. Can Shinryu do anything to Xianmen in those days? Oh. Hatred narrowed his eyes and looked at him. It turns out that ninth brother is so ambitious. So according to what ninth brother said, this is not good, that is not good, what should we do? Li Yunxin's face turned serious. He pointed to the camp of the monsters in the west and then pointed up. There is so much monster power, second brother, can't you see it? Unseen gods rely on the power of prayers to increase our cultivation. But second brother, you should know that the resentment of the souls, and even the souls themselves, can be turned into spiritual power and monster power. I am not talented, but I set up a big array in the city of Wei, using the power of prayers of millions of souls, and with my cultivation of the transcendent state, I sealed Yunzi, who is in the true state, into the scroll. Then with the power of prayers I entered the true state. Second brother, think about it again. If there is such a convenient method, why didn't you use it before? It is because the Daotong is powerful, and they are in a delicate balance with us demons. If they want to eliminate the monsters, they need to pay a huge price. But if there is a big monster using this method to cultivate, not to mention how many people they need to kill, how much resentment they need, if the Daotong Kenzo knew about this, they would definitely not sit back and do nothing. And because of this, maybe some small monster kings tried to do this. But they were discovered by the Taoist priests and swordsmen and killed. Or their level is too low and they can't do anything. But second brother, now. Xianmen has broken the balance first. The big monsters follow the rules and are careful, but they still want to fight. Li Yunxin said sternly, they have unleashed their ferocious nature and killed until corpses and bones are everywhere, but they still want to fight. They have already shed all pretense of cordiality. What are you afraid of, second brother? Send all the big and small monster kings and the demon soldiers under them to death. Then send all the Taoist priests of Cloud Mountain to their deaths. By then, the land of Yi Kingdom will be filled with ghosts and resentment. I will set up a big array for second brother, and let them all be used by second brother. Such a huge power that no one has ever had before, and no one will be able to surpass. Can it be compared to the 3-part dragon soul? By then, second brother will be stronger than the Shinryu, and the 2 sages. Every time Li Yunxin said a word, Hatred's eyes flashed once. When Li Yunxin finished his last sentence, Hatred frowned, and his eyes seemed to want to cut open Li Yunxin's chest and dig out his heart, eager to see if what he said was true. After a moment of silence, Hatred said in a low voice, Ninth brother set up an array for me? Ninth brother cultivates the art of painting. Now in the whole world, probably only ninth brother has the ability to turn resentment into his own. With this ability, if ninth brother secretly does something, how can second brother know? And, so many ghosts, are you sure you can keep them? Ghosts? Second brother, didn't you notice? Li Yunxin also lowered his voice. That Bai Yunxin killed hundreds of people in Little Rock Canyon, but after 6 hours, those hundreds of wandering souls are still wandering in the world of the living, and haven't been hooked by Black Bai Yanjun. When I was fleeing in the wild forest of Qing Kingdom, I also gathered countless wandering souls, and also haven't been hooked by Black Bai Yanjun. Second brother, did you not realize that something might have happened in Sanluo Temple so that Black Bai Yanjun can't show up for a while? Chapter 362. This is such a great opportunity, but my second brother is still hesitating. You should know that we are not the only ones who have thought of this. Li Yunxin looked at him. All the great demons in the world with a bit of brains will have thought of this sooner or later. If someone else gets the first move, I'm afraid my second brother will regret it for thousands of years, even tens of thousands of years. Right at this moment they suddenly heard a crisp clap from inside the hall. Then, a tall and slender man with a handsome face wearing a white robe leisurely walked out of the door. With a smile on his lips, he clapped a few more times. Then he put down his fan and opened it, saying, "What a good, thousands of years, even tens of thousands of years. Lord of Tongtan, your good-for-nothing ninth brother sure has a big mouth." Seeing this person, Li Yunxin was slightly stunned for a moment. From afar, his clothes, demeanor, and his extremely annoying tone made him look exactly like himself. Therefore he immediately sneered, "Second brother? Why haven't I heard you mention this idiot before?" The man in white was stunned. Then he frowned in disbelief and pointed at him. "Little bastard, how dare you scold me?" Li Yunxin said quickly, "Little bastard, who are you talking about?" The man in white was furious. "I'm talking about you." Li Yunxin sighed sympathetically and turned to look at Hatred. Hatred couldn't help but laugh out loud, but he stopped himself. He hurriedly coughed and said, "Ninth brother, this is your big brother's friend." Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. "So?" Yazi coughed again and said with a smile, "Ninth brother. Now that things have come to this, to tell you the truth, I really don't want to swallow you." After saying this, he turned to look at the man in white. "This is Wanderer Bai. He has followed your big brother for 2,000 years. A ghost cultivator at the peak of the realm of truth can't be underestimated. In fact, your big brother and I have already thought of the method you mentioned. This Wanderer Bai is your big brother's envoy." When he said this, Unfettered White snorted disdainfully. He seemed to have just realized that he had fallen into one of Li Yunxin's old tricks, but now that Hatred was talking about serious business, he couldn't curse back. He just closed the fan and stared at Li Yunxin with a gloomy look. Li Yunxin was silent for a moment. Then he smiled and tapped his forehead with his finger. "I see. A good second brother. So, you took Bai Yunxin and Hong Yangzi to lure me into the trap?" You idiot immediately fell for it. Wanderer Bai finally found an opportunity. He opened his folding fan with a swoosh, put his hands behind his back, and took 2 steps forward gracefully. He looked at Li Yunxin out of the corner of his eye, looking like a scholar. "I heard that you're good at strategizing. Now that I've played a little trick, you fell for it obediently. Lord Tongtian, do you really want your ninth brother to participate in our big business?" It seemed that Wanderer Bai's words had poked Li Yunxin's sore spot. Li Yunxin knew he had been tricked, so he wasn't as calm as before. Therefore, when Wanderer Bai said this, Li Yunxin frowned. "Second brother. Second brother, this ghost cultivator insulted me in front of my face. Are you going to sit back and do nothing?" Hatred didn't say anything, but Wanderer Bai immediately laughed out loud. He closed his fan with a swoosh and pointed at Li Yunxin from afar. "Ah, little boy. Now you look like you've been wronged and want to pull the corner of your big brother's clothes? Before I met you, I treated you as a well-matched opponent." Then he turned around and strode into the hall, his clothes fluttering in the wind. "Unfortunately, you're still no match for me. I'm extremely lonely." After he disappeared from the hall, Hatred looked at Li Yunxin again. He saw Li Yunxin turn his head, pucker his lips, and stare at the direction where Wanderer Bai had gone. He said with hatred, "Ah, second brother. It doesn't matter if you want to use my formation or swallow my soul. But this ghost cultivator insulted me, he also insulted the dragons and you, second brother, that big brother of yours has an indifferent temperament and likes music." Yazi interrupted his words and smiled faintly, "But he also likes men." Then he patted Li Yunxin's shoulder, turned around and walked into the hall. "Ninth brother, you can't insult the dragons. Even if you do, it's not the dragons who are insulted. You have to know this. Your other brothers and sisters aren't as easy to talk to as second brother. Hong Yangzi and Bai Yunxin are both in the side hall. If you want to see them, go and see them." Then Hatred disappeared behind the huge golden screen, which was carved with the picture of Shinryu subduing a group of demons. Li Yunxin stood silently in front of the hall for a while. The hatred on his face had disappeared, and he was now calm. "Interesting." Then he laughed in a low voice. He seemed to be suppressing his original intention to laugh out loud, so his shoulders trembled slightly. "I like smart people the most. I thought he was a smart person." Wanderer Bai shook his head and smiled, then sighed slightly in self-pity. "Unfortunately, there are always more stupid people in this world. Lord Tongtian, since we've already found the Guanyuan crypt, why do we need to bring him along?" He was talking in a big room. But in fact it was like a hall. In the middle of the magnificent hall, there was an astonishingly big white jade bed, decorated with jewel curtains and gold and silver tassels. At this moment, Wanderer Bai was reclining on the big bed, looking casual and relaxed. On the contrary, with one hand behind his back, Lord Tongtian, who was slowly pacing on the thick carpet in the room, looked like a guest. Hatred thought for a while, then shook his head. Young Master Bai, my ninth brother is not a simple person. Did you see him lose his temper just now? No, he's not that easy to get angry. Maybe at other times, but at this critical moment which he thinks is between life and death. Of course I know that. Wanderer Bai smiled faintly. Your ninth brother was surprised by my wisdom, and knew that he had fallen into a trap. Therefore he suddenly felt alarmed, thinking that he had met a strong opponent. So he immediately pretended to be surprised and angry so that we would look down on him. This kind of method is useless against this unaffiliated cultivator. I also know that he will make some moves soon. But I'm not in a hurry. After all, he still needs some time to compete with Xianmen. These days, I'll play with him. He thought for a while, then suddenly smiled. Actually, your ninth brother's appearance is not bad. Hatred smiled bitterly. Young Master Bai's tone is also my ninth brother's tone. No wonder I felt close to him when I first saw him. Hearing this, Wanderer Bai suddenly smiled charmingly, squinting at him. Close. Does Lord Tongtian feel close to me? Then should Lord Tongtian really get close to me? Hatred coughed deeply, then said seriously, Young Master Bai, don't joke like this. My big brother won't like it. Let's get down to business. Before my ninth brother arrived, you and my big brother doubted my sincerity. Now that my ninth brother is here, you should know that I won't waver on Shinryu's side. Then you should tell me the key to this Guanyuan cave. Otherwise, just like what I said to my ninth brother, how would I know whether you'll use me and then throw me aside? Wanderer Bai laughed. Lord Tongtian also has the heroic spirit of a straightforward person. Never mind. Young Dragon Master should be here soon. I'll tell you in advance. Nowadays, those ignorant secular people also talk about feng shui and earth qi. But Lord Tongtian, do you know when this theory of feng shui and earth qi started? Wanderer Bai got up from the big bed, reaching out his hand to the back of his head. His combed black hair scattered wildly. He walked a few steps on the ground barefoot, then went to the short table beside the bed and took a silver pot with golden threads. He lifted it up high and poured the fine wine into his mouth. His loose inner robe became even looser, revealing his well-proportioned chest. Hatred frowned slightly, moving his gaze away from his chest. Young Master Bai said it started 2,000 years ago. At that time, you were still a cultivator of the Daotong school. The method you practiced focused on the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers. Then you discovered feng shui and earth qi by chance, but it couldn't be accepted by the Daotong school. Thus, you couldn't advance in your cultivation and died of depression. But my big brother saved you and you became a ghost cultivator. Yes, that's right. Wanderer Bai swallowed the fine wine and let out a long breath. He seemed to be a little drunk. Then he looked at Hatred with blurred eyes. Since 2,000 years ago, there have been all kinds of caves and feng shui in this world. The big cave we're in now is the Guanyuan cave I mentioned. The reason why it's called this is because, in terms of feng shui, the function of this cave is similar to the Guanyuan point in our body. The Guanyuan point in the body consolidates vitality and gathers demonic energy. And this Guanyuan cave, with my feng shui method, can similarly consolidate vitality and gather demonic energy. He smiled proudly. Lord Tongtian knows that the painting path your ninth brother practiced can be used to set up a formation to gather the resentment of souls. He also knows that the Daotong Kenzo also has a formation that can do this. But now, with the feng shui method that I've comprehended, I can also do it. Humph. Those idiots 2,000 years ago called my method a crooked one. But now he stared straight at Hatred, revealing an evil smile. Now I'll use my method to refine the souls of those stinky Taoists into demonic energy. Young Dragon Lord takes 70%, and Lord Tongtian takes 30%. Both of them can become great demons that can roam the world. As for me, I'll avenge my past. It's not in vain for my 2,000 years of obsession. He laughed wildly. Hatred also laughed along with him. Then he said, I've deduced what young Master Bai said. But how does your feng shui method work? I want to know this. Wanderer Bai immediately stopped laughing and his face changed. He was tall and slender with regular facial features. But once Yazi asked about this, the mouth, ears, eyes and nose on his face immediately twisted into a ball, turning into a horrible ghost face. He suddenly stretched out his neck and sent his ghost face to Yazi's face like a soft noodle, and stared at Yazi's face from left to right. A sharp voice came from his mouth that had become a black hole. Feng shui method? Why does Lord Tongtian ask this? Why does he ask this? Is it because he wants to steal my method? His voice suddenly rose a notch. Don't believe me? Don't believe me? You don't believe me? This scary voice was sharp and harsh, and the last 3 sentences became louder and louder. The utensils made of crystals, gems, and glazes in the big room all exploded with a bang, and the tiny fragments were directly shaken into big clouds of colorful fog. However, it seemed that it wasn't the first time for Hatred to see him like this. He sighed and took a step back. Since young Master Bai doesn't want to say it, let's not talk about it for now. You calm down first, I still have something to do. After saying this, he turned around and walked out of the room. Unexpectedly, Wanderer Bai's arms suddenly became long, like 2 ropes pouncing over and entangling Hatred's body. Lord Tongtan, where are you going? Lord Tongtan, don't you want to be close to me? Don't you want to be close to me? Then his body floated over, but he didn't look like a human anymore. He showed his ghost appearance again. Like a cloud of white fog with a scary face, he wandered on Hatred's body. His black hole-like mouth made a whimpering sound and no one knew what he was saying. Hatred stood in front of the door and slightly closed his eyes for a while. Then he let out a long breath and opened his eyes again. He said in a low voice, "Young Master Bai is drunk." As soon as he said this, his body shook. Wandering Cultivator Bai, who had revealed his true body, was immediately shaken into countless wisps of white smoke, which quickly gathered on the big bed. He had regained the appearance of an elegant young master dressed in white from before. He just frowned and stared at Hatred. Hatred snorted again and strode out of the door. At this moment, Li Yunxin was trying to throw a white jade cup out of the window. Looking out from the window of the palace, it was all dark. The sunlight coming in from the hole was insignificant, only equal to the light of the crescent moon. In this vast and distant darkness, the light of the bonfire stretched far into the distance. Even though he was in the palace far away from the demons, he could still hear some roars from time to time. He held a lantern in his hand and threw it out of the window. The little thing drew an arc in the air and landed on the ground outside. It even rolled a few times. But when he turned his head, he found it on the table again. I tried. It didn't work, Bai Yunxin said in a low voice. It was also a huge and wide room, and the layout was the same as Wanderer Bai's. Bai Yunxin, Red Madam, and that maid were all imprisoned here. In fact, Li Yunxin's situation was similar to theirs. Li Yunxin turned around from the window and looked at Bai Yunxin. You took her away and said you didn't believe me. If you knew we would meet again today, why did you do that? If I didn't leave, I'm afraid she would have died in Dongting a few days ago. Bai Yunxin said and turned to look at Red Madam. When Li Yunxin walked into the room, the fish monster looked up at him with surprise in her eyes. However, it was just for a moment. Soon, she was overwhelmed by sadness again and couldn't get rid of it. She continued to sit in the chair against the wall and stared at the window. Why did you do that? Bai Yunxin frowned and looked at her. Your father didn't treat you like a father and daughter. In order to provoke the conflict between my adoptive father and Shinryu, he refined the dragon soul into you. Do you know that once your dragon soul is taken away, your soul will also scatter and scatter? This person, she said and pointed at Li Yunxin, this person can't do anything. But Red Madam turned a deaf ear to her words. There was no emotion in her eyes at all. She was like a body that was about to lose its vitality. She is a ghost cultivator. Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice. Her obsession is love. This kind of thing can't be explained by common sense. Why do you say this? But what about provoking your adoptive father and Shinryu? Bai Yunxin looked at him. I can't tell you about this. She refused directly. Then the young maidservant beside her served her tea and stared at Li Yunxin at the same time. It seemed that, a few months ago, she was a mortal who had to tremble in front of them and beg for her life, but now she had become a great demon who could stand in front of them and talk calmly. This matter puzzled her so much that she became more and more curious about Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin glanced at the teacup in Bai Yunxin's hand. When Bai Yunxin opened the lid, he saw that it was not tea but a red, warm liquid. He felt that it might be what he imagined. If you don't tell me, how can I save you? He sighed, walked to Bai Yunxin and sat down next to her, looking at her. I originally had a good plan. But the 3 of you came out and messed up my plan. I could have ignored you. But first, I promised you that I would help you settle the engagement with the dragons. Second, you did it to save me. How can I owe you such a favor? Bai Yunxin took a sip of the tea. She licked her lips quickly with the tip of her tongue and looked at Li Yunxin with a pair of black eyes. Save us? Then she turned to look at the little maid beside her. Do you believe him? The little maid giggled. But maybe it was because she was a demon, her smile always revealed a ghastly evil spirit. I don't believe him. In my opinion, miss, he obviously wanted to sneak into Hatred's lair, but he didn't have a good excuse. Now that he saw us, he just rushed over. After saying that, she covered her mouth and laughed again. At this time, Li Yunxi knew where the evil spirit in her smile came from. When she smiled, she showed her sharp fangs in her mouth, coupled with her cute appearance. It was very strange. Bai Yunxin smiled as well. That's right. That fish spirit on the way here found out about you and made a fuss to find you. First, I found her annoying. Second, I didn't know where to go. Third, I was afraid that she would really kill herself and waste the dragon soul. So I came here to have a look. As for whether Hatred deliberately revealed it to her, or whether Hatred set this trap for her, I don't care. Although I have wandered in this world for thousands of years, as long as my adoptive father doesn't show up, no one dares to do anything to me. If you want to save her, you might as well save her. After she said this, the little maid beside her became anxious. Miss, you lost your mind. You obviously also. Bai Yunxin suddenly turned her head and stared at her. Shut up. But the maid didn't listen. Like a gust of wind, she ran behind Li Yunxin to look at her miss, grabbed Li Yunxin's shoulder to cover herself, and only showed half of her face. Let me tell you, if you want to save that fish spirit, you have to save my miss. My miss is not. Little hussy, how dare you? Bai Yunxin seemed to be angry and became angry. She waved her sleeve and a white feather shadow appeared in the air. Li Yunxin had seen the power of this shadow. When he was plotting against the 9th young master, he lured Bai Yunxin here. At that time, when this monster waved her sleeve, half of the houses on the street were destroyed by her, and many people died. Now, seeing that she used this trick in the house, Li Yunxin immediately raised his hand to block. The scales on his right arm were closed and there was a metallic light. Then there was a buzzing sound. It was as if countless steel knives were chopping down on an incomparably hard iron plate, causing the floor of the room to tremble. Li Yunxin's right arm immediately exploded with a large amount of sparks. Seeing that her attack didn't hit, Bai Yunxin became angry. She immediately stood up from the chair and shouted, Well, I haven't fought with you for a long time. Now let me see what you are really capable of. After saying that, 2 beams of dazzling white profound light suddenly lit up behind her. A pair of dazzling white wings could be vaguely seen in the middle of the 2 streaks of light. Between the feathers of the wings, there were specks of white light falling down. If Li Yunxin didn't feel the vigorous and violent monster power contained in the wings, he would really think that the scene was holy and beautiful, like a dream or a fantasy. However, the maid behind Li Yunxin wasn't afraid at all when she showed such a terrible and terrifying aura. She spoke very fast. While hiding behind Li Yunxin, who also stood up, she said like a popcorn, Listen to me, my miss didn't do it just for the fish monster. When the fish monster asked her to come, she immediately agreed and told me that no matter what, she had to take a look. I've been with her for so long, and I've never seen her take a look for someone else. She told you to ignore her and save her because you will be in danger if you save 3 people. But if you don't save my miss, you're the biggest bastard in the world. Little hussy, I'll tear your shell off. Hearing the maid say all these in one breath, Bai Yunxin seemed to be really angry. The wings made of light behind her suddenly expanded, as if there were 10 suns appearing in the room at the same time. Then there was another long and drawn-out cry of a crane. Countless white feathers, shining with a deadly cold light, shot over like a torrential storm. The maid panicked and hurriedly shouted, Miss, spare me, spare me, spare me. I won't dare to do it again. Young Master Li is still seriously injured, you're going to kill him. The violent aura and monster power pressed over like a rolling tide. The outer robe formed by the monster power on Li Yunxin's body was torn and turned into countless tiny pieces. However, a new white robe grew out from the pieces. It looked like the skin was regenerating. In this fast, violent and shocking attack, Li Yunxin took a deep breath and shouted in a deep voice, Enough! Then, this attack actually disappeared without a trace because of his low shout. It was as if everything was just an illusion. Bai Yunxin and the maidservant stood dumbfounded in the room. After a full 3 breaths, Bai Yunxin looked at her hand in disbelief, then looked at Li Yunxin. How is this possible? Chapter 363. Li Yunxin panted heavily twice and took another step back. He seemed to be exhausted. But even so, he actually dissolved the attack of a raging True Realm demon. There were 3 realms in the True Realm. Enlightened Master, Advanced Enlightened Master and Perfect Harmony Enlightened Master. And Bai Yunxin's cultivation level was about to enter the Advanced Enlightened Master realm. Although the improvement of a demon's cultivation mainly came from the power of faith, and this Bai Yun Xin had been wandering around the world for a long time, and didn't pay much attention to it as a true realm demon, her attack was not something that could be easily blocked by anyone below the profound realm. Moreover, Li Yunxin was not resisting, but neutralizing it. There was a world of difference between the two. This strange thing made Bai Yunxin forget to be angry. She stared at Li Yunxin for a while and said again, "How could it be?" Then Li Yunxin saw that her eyes were filled with curiosity and danger. Just before he had the time to say enough, Bai Yunxin clasped her hands together and suddenly pushed forward. 10 streaks of snow-white sword light shot over at the same time. Before Li Yunxin could make any move, they had already landed on his body. But he was still unharmed. The curiosity in Bai Yunxin's eyes grew even more intense, to the point that her eyes instantly turned pitch black, without a single trace of white left in them. Even the maidservant behind Li Yunxin, Little Shell, cried out in panic this time, "Miss, don't do it." Just as she said this, Li Yunxin suddenly moved. He took a heavy step forward. With this step, the whole room seemed to tremble with his stomp. Then he said in a low voice, "Good." No one knew what he meant by the word good, and who he meant it for. But just as he said this, a burly golden strongman suddenly appeared in the void behind Bai Yunxin. This warrior's body was made of golden light, and it shone brightly. Standing in the void, his figure was a little blurry and flickering. It seemed that the person controlling him didn't have the ability to completely control him. Looking at his appearance again, he was not as dignified and solemn as those gods summoned by ordinary Taoist techniques. On the contrary, this strong man looked like a mortal who mingled in the streets. He was a slightly plump man in his 30s or 40s. He had short hair and was bare-chested. He only wore a pair of shorts and a short towel over his shoulder. But even so, coupled with the brilliant golden light on his body, this man had a mysterious aura around him. As soon as he appeared, Bai Yunxin immediately turned around and waved her hand to slash a sword light. However, the sword light passed through his body and then the man, he pressed Bai Yunxin to the ground. Maid Xiaoqi exclaimed again. This time it was because, how was this possible? Looking at Bai Yunxin, she was a great demon of the true state. She had roamed the world for so long, but when had she ever been pressed to the ground by anyone? She was stunned for a moment, and then countless rays of light burst out of her body. It was unknown whether it was sword energy, flying feathers, or some kind of innate magical power. In short, she seemed to have used all her abilities to break the golden-bodied god who was pressing on her shoulder. But she didn't expect that the short towel on the god's shoulder was also a powerful magical weapon. The burly man muttered something and even raised his head to look at Li Yunxin. Then Li Yunxin shouted in a low voice, "Good." The god raised his hand and removed the towel from his shoulder. Then he pressed the golden towel on Bai Yunxin's body. The various divine powers of this true realm great fiendish demon instantly disappeared without a trace. The maid was so shocked that she couldn't say a word. Even Red Madam, who looked like a wooden statue, slightly opened her eyes and looked at Bai Yunxin on the ground. At this time, Li Yunxin walked over and squatted down beside Bai Yunxin. He leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Stop it." His voice was calm and powerful. Then he thought for a moment and said to Bai Yunxin, who was staring at him, "I can only use the restriction in this room for 15 minutes. If you continue to make trouble after this time, Hatred and Wanderer Bai will know. My injury hasn't recovered yet. Do you really want me to die here?" The two of them looked at each other for a few seconds. The darkness in Bai Yunxin's eyes slowly disappeared, and her black and white eyes reappeared. She stared at Li Yunxin. "I'm teaching my maid a lesson. How dare you stop me? I'm here to save you." Li Yunxin sighed and interrupted her, "But I'm here for something else. I want to save all three of you. But if you continue to make trouble, I might not be able to leave." Bai Yunxin's expression changed. After a while she frowned. "Save us?" She looked at Li Yunxin as if she was looking at a monster. "You would do such a thing?" Then she looked at her servant girl. Li Yunxin stood up. At the same time he shouted to the golden light warrior who was still pressing Bai Yunxin, "Done." The incredible god immediately turned into spots of light and disappeared. Then all the tables, chairs and cups in the room that were destroyed during the fight were miraculously restored. "Don't misunderstand." Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief, smiled and said to Bai Yunxin, "It's because you saved me." At this moment the maid Little Shell hurried over to help her young miss. Bai Yunxin glared at her fiercely. The maid was so scared that she was about to cry, but she still went over and hugged her arm. I was plotted against and broke through to the next realm. He thought for a while. So, there are some things that I can't owe you. Speaking of which, you saved me twice. If I don't return this favor, I'm afraid that I'll encounter inner demons and tribulations in the future. But at this moment, Bai Yunxin didn't seem to be most concerned about this point, although it seemed that Li Yunxin's words didn't convince her completely. She only stared at Li Yunxin. How did you do it? You mean, I used my cultivation level, which is almost one realm lower than yours, and I was seriously injured. But, I was able to neutralize 2 of your attacks and even pressed you to the ground so that you couldn't move and let me play with you? Li Yunxin blinked. Do you want to know? Anger appeared on Bai Yunxin's face again, and she looked like she was about to attack again. The maid hurriedly hugged her arm. Young miss, young miss. Li Yunxin laughed. I'll tell you. But if I tell you, you have to tell me what you said just now about Lord Dongting sealing the dragon soul and provoking your adoptive father and Shinryu. You know, if I want to save you, I have to stir up trouble. But if I don't know more, I won't be able to stir up trouble. Then, regardless of whether Bai Yunxin responded or not, he said in a low voice, Actually, it's not my ability. It's just that I know more about this palace than you do. The maid's eyes widened. You've been here before? It's my first time here. Li Yunxin said, but I've encountered something similar in the Pitfall Mountain. This palace is a magic treasure. But it might not be an ordinary magic treasure. The Dharma I practice happens to know more about this kind of thing. I know some of the chi movement and the key points. Right now I can only say this much because even I'm not very sure. So in fact it's not that I dissolved or suppressed you. It's that this magic treasure dissolved and suppressed you. It's not a shameful thing to lose to a magic treasure that might be made by a sage. After saying this, he turned to look at Red Lady again. The light in Red Lady's eyes was extinguished again, and she fell into deep sorrow again. This was a world of difference from her appearance in the past. Li Yunxin still remembered the first time he saw her. She was walking on the road in Egret town, wearing a festive red dress. At that time she looked energetic. Although not very happy, there was always a lively life. Maybe it was Li Yunxin's explanation that made Bai Yunxin feel relieved. Or, as a demon, she didn't care much about things like magic treasures. To control a magic treasure required a spell. And the spell couldn't be casually memorized and used. For example, the scholars in Li Yunxin's world could easily understand a seemingly concise and simple principle or theorem. But under this concise and simple appearance, it was the result of decades of systematic basic training. Demons didn't practice Taoism, so they naturally didn't want to understand it. Even if they had a magic treasure, they only wanted to be able to use it. It seemed that Bai Yunxin was also one of them. After listening to Li Yunxin's words, she turned to look at the big house and asked, So, can you get out? I can't. Li Yunxin said straightforwardly, Just now I was borrowing the chi movement. But if I want to go out, it belongs to the scope of opening or closing the prohibition. I can do it, but you have to know that it's not only the magic treasure that won't let me go out but also people. Then what are you going to do? Come here? Bai Yunxin frowned. You're now a demon. Now it's a war between the demons and the Xian men. If you don't help the demons, do you have other purposes? What you said is so strange. I'm a demon, why should I help the demons? Li Yunxin looked at her funny. The demons are also making things difficult for me, the Daotong Kenzo are also making things difficult for me, so isn't it better for me to make them all die? Bai Yunxin shook her head. I'll tell you what you want to do first, then I'll think about whether or not to tell you about my adoptive father. Li Yunxin shrugged slightly. You've already heard it. The demons and the Shen men are making me too annoyed. I want to kill them all. Bai Yunxin was stunned and looked at the maid next to her. Then the two of them laughed together. Their voices were like silver bells swaying in the chilly wind. It was clear and sweet, but there was something strange about it. You're not joking? Bai Yunxin looked like she heard a joke. You want to get rid of the Daotong Kenzo and the demons? Do you know that they have existed since the day there were living creatures in this world? Everything will die one day. If everyone thinks that it's impossible at every stage, then they will really exist forever, Li Yunxin said seriously. Now, I feel that time has advanced to a node. At this node, the demons and the Shen men will both decline. And I will trigger this node. He smiled again. I'm not saying that I'm going to pull all the demons and cultivators to the sky, then kill them all by myself. Bai Yunxin thought for a while, then smiled. Okay. Her smile was a little more evil. I didn't waste my effort to spare your life before. Looking at you now, it's really interesting. This world is very annoying, but you've defeated the demons and the Shenmen. What kind of world do you want? Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he whispered, let's talk about it then. Bai Yunxin put her hands behind her back and walked a circle around him, as if she had thrown all her previous anger out of the window. Instead, she was attracted by Li Yunxin's novel idea, and thus developed a new interest. Then she stopped behind him and whispered, okay, listen. The reason why my adoptive father, the Golden Rock King, asked me to go to Dongting to get the dragon meat every year is that he needs to replenish his monster power. And the reason why he needs to replenish his monster power is that he is actually sealed now. Of course you can guess who can seal him. It's Shinryu. 2,000 years ago, Shinryu fought with my adoptive father. The story of one scale 3 feathers is well known in the world. But what you don't know is that after the battle 2,000 years ago, Shinryu also sealed him. Everyone in the world knows that Shinryu melted half of his soul and sealed him in Dongting 2,000 years ago. And now you also know that the Lord Dongting sealed himself in the lake for 2,000 years in order to protect the dragon soul. But do you know why Shinryu did that? Li Yunxin frowned. After thinking for half an hour, he whispered 2 words, the eye of the circle. The eye of the circle. At this time, Bai Yunxin no longer had the ruthlessness of the demons. Her voice seemed solemn and calm. Yes, the eye of the circle. The eye of the circle was built with half of Shinryu's dragon soul and half of the personal ability of the supreme realm. And you have to know that Shinryu divided half of the dragon soul and kept the other half. Then he turned the other half into 9 sons, so the current Shinryu only has a quarter of the personal ability of the past, but he is still in the supreme realm. Then you can imagine how strong Shinryu was in the past. Bai Yunxin slowly turned in front of him and looked at him, and you can imagine how strong the Golden Rock King was to be able to fight with Shinryu. Li Yunxin took a deep breath. It's hard to imagine. Then, the so-called disaster that Shinryu encountered 2,000 years ago was not a disaster, but to seal the Golden Rock King? Wasn't my adoptive father a disaster? Bai Yunxin sneered, for Shinryu who wanted to be the ruler of all the demons in the world as long as my adoptive father was there, her position would not be stable. In the mortal kingdom, a dynasty will not have 2 monarchs. Is the dragon dynasty enough? Therefore, take another guess. What does the so-called art saint's demonization have to do with this matter? This time, Li Yunxin only thought for 3 breaths. If I guess according to the conditions you gave me, the Golden Rock King is so strong Shinryu would not be able to seal him. And on the side of Xianmen, there used to be 2 sages and the Golden Rock King. But 2,000 years ago Xianmen had 1 more sage and the demons had 1 more Shinryu. Moreover, both Shinryu and the Golden Rock King were unbelievably strong. If I was from Xianmen, I would definitely provoke the 2 demon kings to fight to the death. And if Shinryu wanted to seal the Golden Rock King, then the sages would be more than happy to help. In this way Shinryu would be the ruler of all the demons in the world and Xianmen would get rid of a big problem. Isn't it a win-win situation? But your adoptive father is unlucky. Li Yunxin's eyes were filled with joy as he said this. It seemed that all conspiracies and schemes would arouse his interest. Thus, his voice became even more excited. He began to pace on the ground with his hands behind his back, saying as he walked, interesting. But from Shinryu's point of view, she lost half of her dragon soul to seal the Golden Rock King, so she must know that Xianmen would be happy to see such a situation. She, a demon king, would definitely find it difficult to deal with 3 sages. So what did she do to the art saint? What did she do to the 3 sages? Li Yunxin walked faster. No. There's another variable, the Freemasonry. At that time the Freemasonry was also involved. The Freemasonry also wanted to infiltrate Xianmen. But in order to infiltrate they must first weaken, they hit it off. 2,000 years ago, the 3 sages provoked Shinryu and the Golden Rock King to weaken each other. And 1,000 years ago, Shinryu was prepared and provoked the 3 sages of Xianmen to weaken each other. It wasn't that easy, it was Xianmen after all. But in the dark, the Freemasonry added fuel to the fire. So 1,000 years of war broke out. The 2 sages thought that the art saint was possessed by the devil and Xianmen really fought among themselves. And then, the 2 sages also fell into the Freemasonry's trap. Li Yunxin stopped abruptly and stared straight at Bai Yunxin. There was still a hint of madness in her eyes. Scheming against each other. Interlocking. In the end, all 3 of them will be injured and the third party will benefit from it. Am I right? Bai Yunxin was stunned for a while. How did you think of so much? Li Yunxin laughed out loud. I see. Ha, I hate that I wasn't born in that era. It's truly a turbulent and treacherous situation. But soon he shook his head. No. That was just the beginning, the foreshadowing. Now it's much more dangerous than that. Ah. So, little girl, do you see it? He stared at Bai Yunxin. It's time. 2,000 years of foreshadowing, and now it's time. What I'm going to do now is what those top beings in the world didn't finish. Lunatic. Bai Yunxin snorted coldly. And then? Li Yunxin looked at her, unsatisfied. Go on, I want to know what else is going to happen. And then, Bai Yunxin seemed to be happy to see Li Yunxin's madness, which made him more interesting. So she thought for a while and sneered, and then, that Dongting, the vast Dongting is only the eye of the formation, so what does the whole formation look like? How big is it? Speaking of this, she paused. It's as big as half of the world. In the past 2,000 years, the human dynasties in the central area of the Midland have barely changed, and the territories between countries have barely changed. Why did Daotong and Kenzo spend so much effort to ensure this? That's because these human dynasties and countries form this entire formation. Humph, using mountains and rivers as the formation is nothing. The real formation is using the whole world as the formation. Bai Yunxin sneered again. I know that wanderer Bai. He claimed that he discovered some geomancy and earth chi that suddenly appeared 2,000 years ago. He also said that the Taoist school of Taoism refused to recognize it. That Taoist school of Taoism even recognized the art saint and her painting school. Why didn't they recognize him? Because the geomancy and earth chi he mentioned all originated from the formation that sealed my adoptive father in the world. This formation was created by the three saints and the Shinryu. Who dares to touch it? Once his geomancy and earth chi method is spread all over the world, it will be like termites eating a dam. One day this formation will collapse. Speaking of this, Li Yunxin didn't interrupt. He just frowned slightly as if he was thinking about something difficult to think about. After thinking for a while, he said, You mentioned the inhibition that sealed the Lord Dongting in Dongting. Now hearing what you said, the inhibition of Dongting is like a miniature version of the formation of the world, but it's not the soul of the Shinryu but half of the soul of Chiwen. He pondered for a while. The Lord Dongting also told me that to unlock the inhibition of Dongting, the dragon chi of Chiwen can do it. So the formation of the world you mentioned also needs the soul of the Shinryu to unlock it? Yes. Bai Yunxin said solemnly, if the dragon soul as the eye of the formation is taken away, this formation can still run for a few days. However, once the dragon soul is given to my adoptive father, his inhibition will be unlocked immediately. Before, my adoptive father asked me to go to Dongting to get the flood dragon meat every year because there is a little dragon chi in the meat. With this method, after thousands of years, I can probably break the formation. When I go to get the flood dragon meat, Shinryu knows it, Daotong and Kenzo also know it. But since they know why they have been acquiescing, I can't figure it out. What about you? Li Yunxin frowned. I also can't figure it out. There is too little information. He glanced at Red Lady again. Then your adoptive father suddenly asked you to come to get the dragon soul. Before, the people of Langya Cave Paradise also came to get the dragon soul. What? Red Madam smiled and said, because he said that another calamity is coming for the world. He can't wait any longer. He also said that I can just come to get the dragon soul. Shinryu will not really stop me, Daotong and Kenzo will not really stop me. He also said, the appointed day with that person is coming. Li Yunxin frowned sensitively. Who? I don't know. Bai Yunxin snorted, but I don't want to give the dragon soul to him now. She also turned to look at Red Lady. I think this fish spirit is interesting. I haven't had enough fun yet. Besides, I don't want to marry any dragons. Well, I promised you this. Li Yunxin said, since I promised you, I will do it. At this time, a voice suddenly came from outside the door. How arrogant you are. You are just in the true state and you are injured. How can you guarantee that? Wanderer Bai suddenly opened the door and walked in, fanning himself. Chapter 364. At this moment, his hair was loose and his chest was exposed. Although there was a smile on his face, everyone could see that there was anger hidden under the smile. It seemed that he had been wrong somewhere else. Bai Yunxin's expression changed. She immediately turned to look at Li Yunxin. Who knew how long Wanderer Bai had been listening outside the door when he suddenly broke in? But they didn't notice him at all. However, Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. It's only been a quarter of an hour. Bai Yunxin was slightly stunned and then heaved a sigh of relief. Li Yunxin previously said that he could use the qi in this room for a quarter of an hour, to ensure that their voices in the room wouldn't be heard outside. And now, a quarter of an hour had passed. Wanderer Bai came at the right time. Wanderer Bai didn't know what this sentence meant. He slightly frowned. I said, we were only separated for a quarter of an hour in the front hall. Why did you come looking for me? Do you dislike me? Li Yunxin snorted. I don't want to talk to you. Wanderer Bai's expression froze. It seemed that he was about to lose his temper again. But he quickly suppressed it and looked at Li Yunxin with a smile. This matter isn't up to you. Right now, the Monster Kings outside have come to the hall. Lord Tong Tian wants me to invite you to the hall so that we can discuss the matter. He pretended to open his folding fan again and covered half of his face. He slightly lowered his head and only revealed a pair of eyes to look at Li Yunxin. Coincidentally, I also want to see what kind of brilliant ideas you, who is known for your intelligence, have. Lord Wei River, why don't you come with me? After saying that, he let out a light laugh and closed his folding fan. With his hands behind his back, he swaggered away. In the eyes of outsiders, his behavior might be interesting and cool. But Li Yunxin knew this kind of pretentiousness too well, because he liked to do it most of the time. So he sighed and turned to look at Bai Yunxin. I have to go. Bai Yunxin's expression was strange. She wanted to say something but stopped. The maid beside her said, My young miss told you to be careful. After that, she stuck out her tongue and quickly retracted it. Bai Yunxin didn't yell at her. She just snorted and walked away. Li Yunxin smiled. It's nothing. Even if he wanted to kill me, it wouldn't be now. Then he turned around and walked out. When he reached the door, he glanced at Red Lady, who was sitting against the wall in a daze. Red Lady suddenly grabbed his hand. The demoness stared at Li Yunxin in a daze for a while before saying, Be careful. Li Yunxin also patted her hand. In fact, he had a general idea in his mind, a bold and wild idea. It was just that many of the details were not perfect enough. However, this was something that could not be perfected. The bigger the setup, the harder it was to control the details. All he could do was control a few key points. He had already completed the most important task half a month ago when he was fleeing from the wildfire in the wilderness forest. Right now he needed to complete the first node. To get the approval of the demons or hatred. It might not be a sincere trust, but at least it was enough for him to move freely so that he could proceed to the second step. Maybe the next step would be a good opportunity. Li Yunxin walked in a long and wide corridor. Wanderer Bai was leading the way a dozen steps ahead. He didn't know what was wrong with Wanderer Bai. He looked at him from time to time, like a prostitute in heat. Li Yunxin thought of this and suddenly understood something. He was stunned for a moment and then sighed. He walked like this for a quarter of an hour. He didn't know how many turns he made, but he came to the door of a hall. This hall didn't seem to be the one he came to when he entered the palace. It was bigger than that one. As soon as he walked to the door, he heard a loud noise. It sounded like someone was quarreling inside. The noise almost broke the roof. But if he listened carefully, he would find that it was just a lot of people talking loudly and making noise. When he stepped into the door, he saw everything clearly. The hall was very tall. The tallest among the demon kings was more than 6 feet tall. This height, according to the measurement of Li Yunxin's previous world, was almost 7 meters tall. It was almost the height of a 3-story building in this world. The clenched fist was almost as tall as him. But such a demon standing in the hall didn't seem uncomfortable at all. There was a considerable distance between the top of his head and the roof. The dragon carved on the roof was slightly blurry. It was tall and wide. If he looked around, he would find that the faces of the demon soldiers and servants standing beside the house were blurred. Instead of calling it a hall, it was better to call it a covered roof. It was as bright as day under the bright light. In such a hall, dozens of demons of different heights and appearances were gathered together. It was densely packed and bustling with noise and excitement. And hatred sat on the main seat in the north. The throne was made of shiny gold and inlaid with all kinds of gems. It was luxurious and extravagant. But when he sat on it, he didn't feel out of place at all. On the contrary, it made him look dignified like a god in the clouds. When he stepped into the door, Wanderer Bai, who was in front of him, walked towards Yizi and said loudly, Monster Kings, the person you want is here. This is the famous Lord of Wei River, Dragon 9 Kisses. But now he prefers to call himself Li Yunxin. He was the one who killed your demon generals in the Redstone Gorge. Wherever he went, the tall demon kings made way for him. They seemed to be afraid of him. After he said this, the demon kings immediately stopped talking. Only Wanderer Bai's voice could be heard echoing in the vast hall. And these scary big demons stared at Li Yunxin. They weren't looking at him in a friendly way. You could find all kinds of negative emotions in their gazes, but none of them were respectful or friendly. Wanderer Bai walked for the time it took for half an incense stick to burn before he reached the side of Hatred's throne. He turned around and looked at Li Yunxin from afar. If you want to ask him for an explanation, let's do it now. As soon as he said this, the demon kings became noisy again. But at this moment, Yazi raised his hand slightly and said in a deep voice, "All of you are venerables among the demons, and also king dukes and generals under me. You have the power to command an area. So you should know that tearing and killing soldiers is a common thing. You don't need to make a big deal out of this." After saying this, he turned his head slightly and looked at Wanderer Bai with the corner of his eye. "Young Master Bai, we need to talk business now. Let's not talk about personal grudges for now." Wanderer Bai snorted coldly. "How can I dare to go against Lord Tongtian's will?" And so, these wild and unruly demon kings actually quieted down for the time being. Although they would still whisper and whisper angrily to each other. But considering their cruel nature and the fact that King Generals was actually just a title and didn't have a close relationship with them, it could be seen that Hatred's reputation was quite prominent among the demons of this country. Then Hatred nodded slightly to Li Yunxin. "Ninth brother, I called you here to discuss the matter you mentioned before." Hatred paused and waved his hand. The heavy door behind Li Yunxin closed. He continued, "It's about converting the souls of the cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo into resentment and demon power." Hearing this, Li Yunxin frowned slightly and looked at the demon kings in the hall. Hatred seemed to know what he was thinking and smiled. "What? Ninth brother, do you think that only your big brother and I can enjoy such a good thing?" Then he shook his head and stood up, raising his hands slightly. "All the great demons here have followed me for a long time. These friends can't be sacrificed so casually. If your big brother and I can enjoy the benefits, you and your other brothers and sisters will naturally benefit as well. The demon kings will also benefit from this." Hearing these words, the crowd of demons immediately became noisy, shouting and cheering together as if victory was right in front of them. At this moment, Wanderer Bai spoke again. His voice was soft but sharp, like a venomous snake slithering in the crowd. "So Lord Tongtian is still kind-hearted. What about your ninth brother? Back then he actually said that he wanted to sacrifice all the demon kings present. He's truly sinister and ruthless." At this moment, Li Yunxin understood why these demon kings were so hostile towards him. When he entered Redstone Gorge, he did kill a lot of small demons, but who would care about small demons? The demon kings didn't hate him because their demon soldiers were killed by him, but because Hatred and Wanderer Bai told these demon kings what he told them before. Who wouldn't hate him when they knew that Dragon Geo kissed Li Yunxin to throw them away as consumables? So Li Yunxin laughed. "So you sold me out. Second brother, you didn't do it properly." Hatred coughed. "Ninth brother, I didn't mean it, but..." Li Yunxin shook his head. "It doesn't matter. So, what do you want to ask me when you called me here?" Wanderer Bai smiled sinisterly. As the saying goes, one man's stratagem is limited. Lord of Wei River, Li Yunxin's wisdom is well known in the world. Although we have already thought of what you said, we still feel that there might be some flaws. So we want to hear your plan. Maybe we can complement each other. Moreover, these demon kings will fight side by side with Lord of Wei River in the future. It's a good thing to resolve the hatred and make friends with him earlier. What do you think? I think we should refine this little dragon first so that we can rest assured. Just as Wanderer Bai finished his words, someone else spoke. The voice was vicious and low, as if it came from a cold pond. However, the demon who spoke wasn't very tall or big. His face was green and he wore a cyan light armor. There was a white cloak on his shoulder, and 2 golden melon hammers hung on his waist. After saying this, he walked out from the crowd of demon kings, stood in the front, and stared at Li Yunxin. "I heard that Dragon Geo didn't have any ability, and he lived by the Dongting Lake, relying on the Lord Dongting to protect him. But after the Lord Dongting went to see the Dragon Lord, Li Yunxin used tricks to kill many aquatic creatures in the Dongting Lake. Among them were my former relatives." Speaking of this, he suddenly opened his mouth, making a mocking sound, and then said, "Now he came to our Redstone Gorge and killed so many demon generals without any explanation." "Humph," Wanderer Bai interrupted him with a smile. "It turns out that Lord Panchang also has relatives in the Dongting Lake. But this matter. After all, Lord of Wei River is our comrade now. Bullsh *T comrade." This time the person who spoke had a deep and powerful voice. When he opened his mouth, it was like the roar of countless beasts shaking the ground slightly. Speaking of relatives, Humph, my relatives are in the wild forest. This Li Yunxin was chased by the Xianmen like a stray dog, but he ran into the forest and set a fire to escape. My relatives were also buried in that fire. This person had a leopard head, round eyes, a swallow chin and a tiger's beard. His body was more than 10 feet tall, looking very powerful and tall. However, the hall was too wide, and the monsters were far away from Li Yunxin, so they couldn't show any oppressive momentum for a while. As soon as he said this, the monsters all echoed him, not caring whether he was a relative or not. If the beasts became demons, they randomly identified those who walked on the ground as their relatives. If the winged insects achieved Taoism, they made a fuss that their relatives were shot down from the sky by Li Yunxin. In short, once they established a relationship with him, they started to quarrel, rubbed their palms, and looked like they were about to pounce, irritable and terrifying. Wanderer Bai squinted his eyes and smiled, covering his mouth with a folding fan. It turns out that Lord Yu also had relatives who were accidentally killed by him. But we also know that he had no choice. Master Bai, do you really believe that he had no choice? The one who spoke had a slender body, looking like a bamboo pole that had achieved Taoism. However, his body was shockingly agile. With a body the size of an ordinary human, he was jumping on the shoulders and heads of the tall and sturdy monster kings, as if he was in a jungle. While scratching his ears and cheeks irritatedly, he looked at Li Yunxin with a grimace. What abilities does he have? To be able to escape from the pursuit of so many sects like Daotong and Kenzo. In my opinion, wow, they've clearly colluded with the orthodoxies and sword sects to come up with such a ruse. Now they've come to our place to spy on us so that they can send a message to us. Lord Tongtian, if we don't kill him, we won't let him go. He originally wanted to harm us, who can rest assured now? Who can rest assured? This monster king's voice was sharp, and he spoke very fast, making people feel uncomfortable. The monster that was stepped on by him stretched out its hand to pull him down, but he avoided it every time, making it even angrier. Therefore they started to clamor as long as they refined Li Yunxin and divided him among us. Hatred's face was gloomy, and he didn't speak on his throne. Only Wanderer Bai let them do as they pleased. He closed his fan with a snap and waved his hand at the thin demon king. Human monarch, please don't be impatient. Then he looked at Li Yunxin from afar. Lord Wei River, I didn't expect the monster kings to dislike you so much, not to mention that you colluded with Taoist Xianmen to make such a ruse. I thought about it. I thought about what you did in the past, and I also feel that your words can't be trusted. Wanderer Bai paced back and forth for a few steps, then turned to look at him, and considering your suggestion, to ask Lord Tongtian to send all these monster kings and monster generals to their deaths and turn them into resentful demonic energy, I feel that you are even more suspicious. Now, I ask you, according to what you said, if we really kill all these monster kings, Lord Tongtian and my young dragon master may be able to use the demonic energy to achieve the Taishang level. But even if they achieve the Taishang level, all the monster kings in the world will die, and the Daotong Kenzo will have an endless supply of mortals. Aren't you killing us with a borrowed knife? In the name of Lord Tongtian and young dragon master's plan, but in fact, you want to exterminate the monster race. At that time, Taoist Xianmen will gather their strength for a few decades and attack fiercely. How should we deal with that? After he asked in a stern voice, the group of monsters started to get aggressive again. Li Yunxin was far away from them, still standing by the door. As a result, it looked as if all the demonic auras in the entire hall were crushing down on him like Mount Tai, while he stood alone in the shadows, weak and powerless. So he sighed and smiled bitterly, so it's such a farce. Then he raised his eyes and looked at Hatred, who was sitting on the throne silently. Second brother, I think you can hear it too, right? These bastards weren't stirred up because I killed this person's family or that person's family. They obviously found some random excuse to frame me and kill me, didn't they? This I can understand. Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. Monsters. What they rely on is their strong physical body. Now a group of people is shouting in front of you, no wonder they are coveting the dragon chi in my body. The dragon's 9 sons chi kiss. The cultivation of the peak of the transcendent stage, no future, no talent. Now they are collaborating with Taoist Xianmen to come up with the trick of injuring themselves to gain their confidence. They are finding these excuses to kill and refine. Then, everyone will be able to get some dragon chi to strengthen their bodies. Li Yunxin paced a few steps and looked up at Hatred. Chi, one of the transcendent stage, was at the Wei River for 1,000 years. No one dared to have any ideas about him because he is a dragon's. But now, in front of you, second brother, these bastards who don't know shit are clamoring to eat me. Second brother, is this your idea? Hatred frowned slightly on the throne. Ninth brother. No one thinks like that. I just want you to make things clear. If you are really innocent, who would dare to lay their hands on the dragons? White Wanderer laughed again. Don't tell me Lord of Tongtown can't see it. Your ninth brother is using some brotherly affection as an excuse, but he is trying to avoid talking about his sinister intentions and change the subject. Lord Tongtian, why don't you ask him directly? That's enough, idiot. I know what you are going to say. Li Yunxin snorted and interrupted him. Wanderer Bai was stunned. But it was not because he was interrupted or because he was called an idiot. It was because there was some kind of inexplicable aura. Those demons were also stunned along with him. These demons lived in countries and had their own territories. They hid themselves and lived happily. The demon society was not like that of humans. There were a lot of goods and information circulating. If they did not have the intention to investigate, even if the dynasty outside was turned upside down, it was normal for them not to know. Therefore, Li Yunxi knew that these guys seemed to know everything about the recent events, but most of them just listened to Wanderer Bai's bullshit. In the minds of these idiots, Longjiu was still a Longjiu of the transcendent stage. Perhaps a day ago, they did not even know why they were gathered here and who they were going to fight against. Even such a group of demons could feel a subtle aura that suddenly appeared along with Li Yunxin's words. For example, they felt a sudden panic in their chest. Suddenly they did not want to talk and they did not want to look at Li Yunxin in the eyes. They only felt that Longjiu, who was originally standing alone at the door, suddenly became somewhat dignified and unpredictable. Although this feeling was just a fleeting moment. But there were still some who were quick-witted, and they suddenly realized, maybe this was the dragon aura. But the problem was a seriously injured Longjiu. Where did he get this kind of aura? Even Hatred, who was sitting on the throne, frowned slightly, and stared at Li Yunxin suspiciously for a while. The group of demons quieted down. It was as if a flock of noisy sparrows had suddenly quietened down. Li Yunxin frowned slightly, looking a little impatient. He looked at Hatred. I wanted to help second brother to do something big so that the demons in the world would no longer be oppressed by Shenmen. But now, at this critical moment where every second counts, I still have to waste time on these bullshit things. Then he turned to look at Wanderer Bai. His eyes were as sharp as two knives shooting over at the same time. Fine. You want to know if all these idiots in the hall are sent to die, what will happen when Shenmen counterattack after a few years? Then I will tell you now. He raised his hand and pointed at his head. Use your brain, idiot. Other than demons, Taoist priests and swordsmen, can't you see anything else? For example, the emperors of those dynasties. Chapter 365. When he said this, Hatred and Wanderer Bai were slightly stunned and looked at each other. Then the demons were also stunned. After a while, they suddenly burst into laughter, as if they had heard an extremely funny joke. The thin and long demon king, human monarch, bared his teeth and pointed at Li Yunxin. Wow, emperors? Don't you know what those little people are? If you rush over while wearing iron armor, won't you still be torn apart by our children? These days when we looted the caravans transporting the red soil to Tongtian Swamp, did each caravan have thousands of soldiers escorting it? The demons were of one mind with him at this moment, shouting loudly, yes, so what? One of my monster generals rushed over and swallowed a dozen of them in one gulp. Then he swung his tail and swept a dozen more. A dozen left palm, a dozen right palm. In the time it took to roll over, they were all scared and ran away. Those mortal soldiers are like paper dolls. Then aren't the emperors of the human world made of flesh and bones? So what if he sent an army? These days, if it weren't for those stinky Taoist priests escorting them, the caravans passing through Redstone Gorge would definitely not be able to return. At this point there was another clamor. All of them revealed arrogant expressions and ridiculed Li Yunxin in front of them. Li Yunxin calmly let them quarrel for a while, only looking at Wanderer Bai. Wanderer Bai turned his face to Hatred, who was sitting on the throne, and said something in a low voice. Then he looked at Li Yunxin. Demon kings, don't be impatient. Li Yunxin, what do you mean by the emperors of the human world? Li Yunxin smiled and snorted coldly. This kind of thing, if you have a little brain, do you still need to say it? If Black Bai Yanjun doesn't show up, no one can capture the souls of the human world. Then, the emperors of the human world, which one of them isn't supported by the wish power of millions or even hundreds of millions of people? Before that, There was Emperor Li who almost reached the Grand Supreme Realm after his death. In order to capture him, Dao Tong crippled 3 profound realm and 2 true realm experts. Now, if the emperors in the mortal world are all dead, and Black Bai Yanjun doesn't care about them, how many ghost cultivators will there be in the world? When Wanderer Bai heard what he said, he frowned and shouted, "Do you think the Xianmen will just sit back and do nothing?" Li Yunxin immediately pinched his throat and imitated his sharp tone. "Do you think the celestial sect of wonders will sit back and do nothing? If they didn't know what you fools have in your heads, they would definitely send people to watch over those emperors and have the demons kill them. Then I implore you to use your brain again, to think." What? Being ridiculed by Li Yunxin like this, anger appeared on Wanderer Bai's face. His face twisted, he felt like he was going to explode from anger. But after 3 breaths of time, he still took a deep breath, gnashed his teeth and said, "What's so difficult about it? If that monarch of the human world really met with some unexpected mishap and died, the power of wish from millions of people would be enough for him to become a true state body. The wish power of millions of people could make a profound realm expert. If it's a big country like Qin or Lai state, it's more likely to make another emperor Li." On Li Yunxin's face was the smile that made Wanderer Bai so angry that he almost went crazy. He pretended to be patient and patient. "Okay, you're finally enlightened. Then what? Tell me more?" They were the ones who came to ask Li Yunxin. But now, he was the one who wanted to tell him these things that were guided by Li Yunxin step by step. However, he couldn't shut his mouth right now because if he did, Li Yunxin would mock him again and say some despicable things. Damn it. Wanderer Bai cursed in his mind. This damn Li Yunxin could provoke the anger in the deepest part of his heart with every word he said so casually. This was so weird. What kind of weird cultivation method did he practice? Did he cast a spell on himself? Finally, he forced himself to clench his teeth and stared at him fiercely. And then? And then, Dao Tong would have to use more powerful cultivators to guard against such a horrible emperor. An enlightened Taoist master needs a perfect harmony master to guard against him, and a perfect harmony master needs a profound realm cultivator to guard against him. If it's a big country like Qin, Lai, and Li, each emperor needs 2 profound realm Taoists. There are dozens of big and small dynasties in the world, but there are only 200 to 300 cultivators above the profound realm, and only dozens above the profound realm. Their fighting power will be greatly weakened. Okay, and then? Keep talking, don't stop, let me see how many things are in your head. As soon as Wanderer Bai finished his words, Li Yunxin immediately pressed him with questions, not even giving him time to breathe or think. Even though the 2 of them were very far apart, Unfettered White felt that Li Yunxin was right in front of him, pressing her face against his. He even felt that he could feel her scorching breath and overbearing aura. It kept pressing down on him, causing his mind to become muddled and his emotions to become flustered. It was as if all his thoughts were tangled up into a huge mess and were stuffed into his brain randomly. He suddenly shouted 3 times, "What then? So what? So what?" The folding fan in his hand fell to the ground with a clatter, but he didn't notice it at all. Yazi and all the demon kings present were silent at this moment. They all looked at him. But Wanderer Bai didn't notice it either. His face trembled slightly and his eyes stared straight ahead. His mouth opened unconsciously, like a fish that was thrown onto the shore. He lost his composure so much that when Hatred coughed and said, "Young Master Bai," in a deep voice, he still couldn't recover from his emotions. At this moment, Li Yunxin strode towards him. As he walked, he looked at Wanderer Bai and said in a fast but strange tone, "Let me tell you that, the people you mentioned are only the people that Dao Tong will use to watch over the emperors and prevent them from dying and becoming ghost cultivators. Besides, they need to double the number, because they don't know if we will also send powerful monsters to assassinate the emperors. In this way, half of Dao Tong and Kenzo's power will be tied up by the countries in the world. They have shepherded the people on behalf of the Celestials, created dozens of dynasties to manage the world for them, and sent them endless offerings and talents. Now, it's time for them to pay their debts." With an intimidating aura, he walked through the crowd of monsters as he spoke. But the monsters that were threatening to refine him 15 minutes ago now looked at Wanderer Bai and then at Li Yunxin. They didn't know why Wanderer Bai lost his composure in just a few sentences. What these stupid demons didn't know was that whether it was Li Yunxin's footsteps or the speed of her speech, they all had a special meaning. She adjusted them according to Wanderer Bai's every look, every movement, and even the speed of his breath. When he finally walked in front of White Wanderer and pressed his face against White Wanderer's, Li Yunxin shouted harshly, Have you ever thought about this, you idiot? With such an advantage that is hard to come by in 10,000 years, and with the decline of the orthodoxy sword sect, why don't you send these idiots who don't even understand what we are saying to their death so that you can clear the Celestial Gate's defensive forces as much as possible so that you can finally attack Cloud Mountain and completely destroy them? You're still dreaming about sharing glory and prosperity with everyone. I said you're a frog at the bottom of a well. Are you still not convinced? What future and recuperation? Wanderer Bai was dumbfounded by Li Yun's yell and couldn't say a word. Li Yunxin suddenly turned to look at hatred. With this war and the death of so many cultivators in Daotong, do you still expect to stop the war and recuperate? The endless war between the monsters and Daotong started 2,000 years ago. Now it's the final battle. After saying this in a stern voice, he stared at hatred. So, Lord Tongdan, now that things have come to this, what's your choice? Hatred was slightly stunned. This was the first time he saw Li Yunxin like this. But it was also the first time he saw Wanderer Bai like this. At this moment, all the monster kings in the hall began to discuss in a low voice. They seemed to understand every word Li Yunxin said. But when everything was linked together, they, who knew nothing about the general situation and the general trend of the world, had no idea what Li Yunxin meant. However, when Li Yunxin said that he would send them out as cannon fodder and sacrifice them, these monster kings heard it clearly. But what about the attitude of Lord Tong Tian on the throne? Lord Tong Tian frowned slightly at this moment, as if he was stumped by Long Jiao's question. And what about the attitude of Wanderer Bai beside the throne? He was even more astonished. Wanderer Bai had clearly only said these words, but his eyes were wide open and his eyelids were trembling. It was as if he was daydreaming, and he didn't even bother to pick up the folding fan that never left his hand. It was really so strange. After about 3 breaths, hatred frowned and coughed again and again. He said in a low voice, "Well, Brother Jiao's words make sense." All the monster kings in the hall immediately looked fierce and shouted, "Is Lord Tong Tian really going to listen to Long Jiao's words? Is he really sending us to our deaths?" This voice suddenly overturned the sky and shook the whole hall. It didn't seem like there were dozens of monster kings in the hall, but thousands of them. Hatred hurriedly said, "What are you talking about? Of course not, of course not." When he said that, those simple-minded monster kings got even more angry and shouted again, "But this Long Jiao actually asked Lord Tong Tian to send us to our deaths. Lord Tong Tian, hurry up and let us eat this kid." These monster kings were said to be the kings and generals under hatred, but in reality, how could they be like the army of mortals, with a strict hierarchy? Even Shinryu, the lord of all the monsters in the world, was only in name. And these monster kings were more like the leaders of the barbarian tribes who lived in the territory of an emperor. Most of them were not as intelligent as dragons. Some of the smarter ones, such as Mr. Panchong, Lord Yu, and Lord Renjun, who were the first to challenge Li Yunxin, did not have much experience. They had no interest in the worldly dynasties or the world's power. They only used their limited wisdom on eating, drinking, and fighting. Therefore, at this moment, seeing that the group of demons were agitated, the human monarch jumped up and down on the shoulder of the great demon. He stared fiercely at Li Yunxin and encouraged them to eat up this insignificant dragon Jiao, so that their bodies could be stained with the dragon qi and become even more powerful. At this moment, Li Yunxin suddenly turned around and suddenly laughed sinisterly. "Eat me?" Then he leaped forward 4 to 5 steps, raised his hand and pointed directly at the Lord Renjun, who was staring at him with a pair of greedy eyes. The robe on his body fluttered violently due to the demon power. "Sure. I'll let you eat. Let's see if you have the life to eat it." After he said this, he roared and pounced forward. Hatred immediately stood up from his throne and shouted sternly, "Don't hurt him." His words were not meant for Li Yunxin, but for the Lord Renjun. But seeing that Li Yunxin had offered himself, how could the Lord Renjun care so much? He was originally a 1,000-year-old white ape, and called himself Lord Renjun. Among the many monster kings, he could be considered as one of the top big monsters. His cultivation had reached the peak of the realm of truth, the level of perfected immortal. Such a monster was originally a feudal lord of an area. Moreover, he was quite intelligent, so he also governed many small monster kings around. He was an important role for hatred in Yi country's fief, so he was naturally arrogant. At this moment he first heard that Li Yunxin wanted to send them to die, and then saw that Li Yunxin actually dared to directly challenge him. How could he care about what Yizi said? He immediately laughed strangely 3 times, and with a loud and brave voice that did not match his thin body, he shouted, "Lord Tong Tian, today this little kid is courting death, so don't blame me." As soon as his voice fell, the Lord Renjun did not dodge as if he wanted to forcefully suppress Li Yunxin's momentum. He also pounced towards him. The fight between monsters and demons was not like the fight between Taoist priests and swordsmen, who used many talismans and messy sword auras. In a fight between monsters and demons, apart from a limited number of natural magical powers, it was a head-on fight with an incomparable tyrannical body. It had to be a battle of brute force against brute force, the bombardment of blood and flesh. Only then could it be considered a battle to its heart's content, heroic to the clouds, and convincing the loser wholeheartedly. This white ape was at the peak of the realm of truth, and had sufficient strength. And the monster kings had long known that Long Jiu was only at the realm of transformation, although they heard that he had advanced to the realm of truth, but when he was being chased by Daotong and Kenzo, he was seriously injured and almost fell from his realm. Such a Long Jiu, so what if it was because of the tyrannical body of dragons? The Lord Renjun knew that as long as he exchanged a few blows with Long Jiu, even if he couldn't kill him in one fell swoop, he would still kill him until he lost all his spirit. In this way the monster kings behind him who had been incited by him would swarm over. At that time he would tear this Long Jiu alive. Now it was the eve of the battle with Xianmen. This little Long Heir was a dispensable character who had incurred the wrath of the masses. What else could Lord Tongtian do? These thoughts flashed through his mind in a flash, and the monster kings behind him really did as he expected. All of them stirred up their momentum, their eyes revealed a murderous glint. They were also ready to pounce. Seeing that both of Li Yunxin's palms were flying towards him, he cackled and shouted, "This lord is going to tear me alive, huh?" Because at this moment, a cloud suddenly rose around Li Yunxin's body. Within the cloud, a godly demon body of over 10 feet suddenly appeared. The appearance of this demon's godly demon body was already within the Lord Renjuan's expectations. But at this moment what caused his heart to be greatly shocked was, suddenly, an incomparably tyrannical force appeared out of nowhere, forcefully freezing his body in mid-air. At this moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through the Lord Renjuan's mind, but in the end they only converged into two sentences: "My life is over." Where did this little Long Jiu get his magical powers from? Following this Li Yunxin's shout of "Good." In mid-air a golden figure flashed past. The two of them were already in mid-air. One of them was surrounded by clouds and mist, the other was surrounded by whistling chilly winds. How could they tell if that golden light was the mysterious light that was stirred up during the battle? Just as the Lord Renjuan's figure paused for a moment, the two of them passed by each other. Then, blood spurted out from the Lord Renjuan's headless corpse with a loud bang, like a fountain that rushed all the way to the roof. At this moment, the demon who was still at the peak of the true state had revealed the true form of the white-haired old ape. His limbs were still twitching violently, as if even until his death, he still couldn't understand what kind of trick had he fallen into. Not only was his body frozen, even the demon power in his body was suppressed. From the moment the two of them exchanged blows to the Lord Renjuan's corpse, it was only a breath's time. Hatred hadn't even had the time to sit down after he shouted those words, and those demon kings who were originally planning to follow up had only just stretched their bodies at this moment. But they had already seen the Lord Renjuan's corpse. His entire body was covered in steel armor, his mouth was filled with dense fangs, and the antlers on top of his head were towering towards the sky. Clutching the head of the Lord Renjun in his hand, his entire body was emitting a powerful aura, as if he was a demon from the 9 underworlds standing in front of them. The group of demons stood dumbfounded on the spot. Then they saw Li Yunxin open his mouth and roar angrily, "You want to eat me?" Countless tiny electric snakes exploded in the clouds around him. "You scavenging for food in the mountains and rolling in the mud, how dare you say this word to me? Are you tired of living for hundreds and thousands of years? Have you forgotten how to write the word, death?" With a bang sound, the head of the Lord Renjun in his palm was crushed by him as he said these few words. The splattered blood and brain matter drenched the few demon kings in front of them. But no one dared to speak any more. That was a Lord Renjun at the peak of the true state. And he was killed by this Long Jiu? After a while, one of the demons who was slightly more familiar with the Lord Renjun finally stuttered, "Tong, Lord Tongton. Please, please." At this moment the Lord Renjun was already dead. A wisp of his soul floated up from his corpse. After being stunned for a breath's time, he regained some consciousness, turned around and was about to escape. But Li Yunxin's eyes were immediately filled with murderous intent, staring straight at the demon king who spoke. "Do, what decision?" With these words, his steel fork-like sharp claws suddenly grabbed and retracted. the muddle-headed soul of the Lord Renjun instantly disappeared in his palm, just like that. If the group of demons were temporarily stunned by his ferocious momentum and the death of the Lord Renjun. But at this moment he was truly terrified. Why did they risk their lives to reach the true state? Because the soul of the true state was not destroyed. Even if the body was dead, it was still very difficult to kill it. But at this moment this Li Yunxin not only killed the Lord Renjun but also took away his soul. How could these stupid and ignorant demon kings have the mood to guess what kind of magic weapon Li Yunxin had on him, and what kind of supernatural power he used? They immediately turned into a mess and avoided Li Yunxin as if they were avoiding the black and white Yama kings. They were afraid that Li Yunxin would become violent again and tear them apart alive. Who said that Long Jiu was just in the true state? And who said that he was seriously injured? Li Yunxin stared at them for a full 2 breaths of time, until no one dared to look him in the eyes. Only then did he turn around and look at hatred. It seems that second brother is usually too lenient. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and said word by word, so much so that these bastards under second brother don't even know what it means to be dead and have their souls destroyed. Second brother told me before that it was not the dragons who were insulted. Second brother's teachings. Li Yunxin snorted, Brother Jiu, remember it? Today I helped second brother kill this demon who didn't listen to orders and cleaned up the house. If second brother blamed me because of this, I have nothing to say. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.